So that was very impressive. Right at 9 o'clock, everyone got very quiet. So welcome, everyone. I'm going to call to order our Mayor's Council meeting. I'd like to welcome everyone and first acknowledge that we are here today on the traditional unceded territory of the Kakite First Nation and the Coast Salish people. If we can start with adoption of the agenda today. So moved and seconded. All those in favor, opposed, carried. And moving on to approval of the minutes from our June 27th meeting, there was a slight typo that has been corrected, but if I can get someone to move the minutes with the corrected typo. Moved? Seconded. All those in favor, opposed, carried. Okay, we're now going to move on to public delegation. I believe we have 8 speakers with us today. Each speaker will be given three minutes to make their presentations to the Mayor's Council. Their names are up on the board, and I'd first like to ask Terry Seneff to please come up and join us.
Maybe no, 3 minutes, 3 minutes.
Okay, there we go.
Welcome.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for this opportunity to make this short presentation today. It relates directly to items 3 and 4.1 of your agenda. My name is Terry Senft. I live in Fleetwood, and I'm retired, and I am a rapid transit enthusiast. I speak on behalf of those Surrey residents who voted for Mayor McCallum in the last election because we opposed LRT on the major arterial roads. However, we voted for SkyTrain technology and not necessarily SkyTrain to Langley at all costs. I would support SkyTrain to Langley if and when the total project can be completed in one shot. However, as we all now know, it is not possible to build SkyTrain beyond Fleetwood within the current funding envelope. And worse yet, as staff has reported, completion of the line to Langley will consume the entire notional funding of $3.55 billion. This will leave no resources to provide any level of rapid transit to fulfill the original mayor's vision for 27 kilometers of rapid transit, including Newton and Guildford. The good news is this dilemma can be resolved. My proposal is to cancel SkyTrain to Fleetwood, as rapid transit will not get to Langley until phase 2 in any event. Let us use the available funding of $1.65 billion to achieve one comprehensive project. I have presented in the past several alternatives to Mayor McCallum, city staff, and Translink staff, and there are SkyTrain alignments within Surrey that could be built for less than $1.65 billion, could better serve the needs of a maximum number of Surrey residents and businesses, and at the same time provide greater flexibility for future rapid rail expansion to Langley, South Surrey, and the Fraser Valley. My recommendation is to first build SkyTrain technology to connect Surrey Central with Newton and Guildford. This would only require 8.8 kilometers of new line because the line between Surrey Central and King George stations would not have to be replicated. There are many reasons for this recommendation, which time does not permit me to cover. However, the handout before you entitled an alternate vision for the implementation of rapid transit south of Fraser provides an overview. That document also summarizes a plan for a way forward with what I call regional light rail options to be considered for phase 2 in addition to SkyTrain technology. The real questions are, where is the best place for SkyTrain technology to interface with regional light rail? And is Langley truly part of the metro core of Vancouver, or is it more of a regional center? In conclusion, whereas the Surrey-Langley SkyTrain project cannot be built within the current funding envelope, and whereas it is not possible to fulfill the Mayor's 10-year vision if SkyTrain is built to Langley, I ask the Mayor's Council to change course and reject the current plan to build SkyTrain partway down Fraser Highway and then direct Translink to build SkyTrain to Newton and Guildford in phase 1. This will free up the opportunity cost.
So we've got to the end of the time, Terry. If you could just have a concluding statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, the good news is that we have only We've only lost 6 months going down this blind alley, so let's do the right thing and make every effort to get a meaningful project back on the rails. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Our next speaker is Roderick Lewis.
Good morning. The previous speaker is wrong. This council should accelerate and stay on the same course for south of Fraser rapid transit. There is no shortage of funding. $1.6 billion is available to be transferred to the Surrey to Langley SkyTrain line from the now on hold LRT project. The LRT project that's on hold was initially planned to be a public-private partnership, delivered and operated by a public-private partnership. This council should demand, by way of a motion passed today, that staff provide this council with a report that clearly identifies the benefits of having the Surrey to Langley SkyTrain project and also all other SkyTrain projects within the south of Fraser delivered and operated for 30 years, similar to the Canada line, as a public-private partnership. Reasonably, it could be expected that a public-private partnership would entail a private consortium providing the $1.6 billion funding shortfall that exists and is necessary, we understand, today to pay for the $3.2 billion Surrey to Langley SkyTrain line. Pass a motion today to have a staff provide you with a report that identifies the benefits of having a project delivered as a public-private partnership. Same as last meeting, I have provided you today with a copy of a letter dated June 14th from the Federal Minister of Infrastructure indicating that no requests have been made, none, no requests have been made to the federal government for funding to pay for the $1.6 billion shortfall of funding for the Surrey to Langley SkyTrain line. It's absurd to suggest that there's a deficiency of funding if you haven't even asked for funding. The last minute of my submissions, I would like to comment on the rude and disrespectful reduction in time that you all decided at the last meeting in camera out of view of the public for public delegations. If this council truly and legitimately values hearing from the public, why didn't you ask the public whether they feel 3 minutes is sufficient? And even if it is felt by the public to be sufficient, you all should not sit there like stuffed penguins after you receive submissions from the members of the public, never asking questions, expressing no interest whatsoever. I appreciate fully that there's a lot of material that you all have to read, but you should not be insulting and denigrating the value of input from your voters and your constituents by reducing the length of their submissions to an absurdly tiny amount. In closing, ask for funding from the federal government to pay for the Surrey to Langley SkyTrain line funding deficiency, and have staff prepare a report that indicates the potential benefits of having a project delivered as a public-private partnership in which a private consortium would provide at least 50% of the required project funding. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roderick. Our next speaker is Navjot Sangera.
Thanks for no questions.
Good morning. My name is Nav Sangera. I am one of the 5,000 plus graduate students and postdoctoral fellows at Simon Fraser University. I also work for the university as an external relations coordinator, and it's in this capacity as staff that I am here today. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. Public transit is key to building healthy, safe, and vibrant communities. But right now on Burnaby Mountain, we have a problem. Bus service on the mountain is ranked in the bottom 10% of all routes in Metro Vancouver in terms of overcrowding, on-time performance, and bus bunching. We are at capacity, and we have been for quite some time. That's the situation today. And at peak times, you're more likely to watch a packed bus sail past you than you are to catch one. And in a short time, it promises to get much, much worse. What is now 25,000 rides per day in public transit to and from Burnaby Mountain is expected to grow to 40,000 plus commutes per day by 2030. In addition to the large student residence population, 10,000 people are expected to be living on the mountain at University in only a couple of years. So how do we meet this challenge? In a fast-growing region such as ours, we need an environmentally sustainable solution that works for taxpayers, works for transit users, and for our region. An urban gondola meets these tests. It works for taxpayers. Over the life of the project, Translink will reduce its operating costs by $35 million. It will also free up 26 Translink buses that can serve other routes in Metro Vancouver. Replacing diesel buses with an urban transit gondola was found to have a high benefit cost ratio of 1.8, not including safety or tourism benefits. It works for transit users. An urban gondola, like others around the world, is a safe, reliable technology that moves more people more quickly. Carrying as many as 3,000 people an hour, the Burnaby Mountain Gondola would reduce the commute time from Production Way to Burnaby Mountain by half or more and help eliminate long wait times. It works for the region. People come to Burnaby Mountain from our entire region, every single municipality represented at this table. In fact, 75% of all commuters to Burnaby Mountain are actually from outside of Burnaby. An urban gondola will better link the entire region to SFU's research, educational, economic, and recreational opportunities. And it works for the environment. This urban gondola would reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 1,700 tons per year. That's the equivalent of taking 1,500 cars off the road. That means cleaner air, less traffic noise, and less congestion for every resident, whether they use transit or not.
So we've just gotten to the end. If you could make some summary comments, that'd be wonderful.
Okay. Our ask today is simple. We would like to see the project move forward to the next phase so that consultation with residents can begin and further important technical work be undertaken. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us. Our next speaker is Teresa Burley.
My name is Teresa Burley. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I am one of the 5,000 residents who lives in University on Burnaby Mountain. I am the president of the University Community Association, and I also work at SFU. I am here today on behalf of the University Community Association to voice our support for the Burnaby Mountain Urban Gondola and ask that the council please continue advancing planning and engage in a community consultation on this matter. There are three main reasons that the Community Association supports the gondola. Number one, a gondola represents a critical, sustainable shift in transit infrastructure. As Nav has already talked about, there's a lot of benefits here. Replacing buses with a gondola servicing Burnaby Mountain would eliminate 50,000 hours of diesel bus operations and would reduce traffic noise in the Burnaby Mountain Conservation Area and reduce traffic congestion. As mentioned, also it will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 17,000 tons annually and taking cars off the road. A transit gondola system would also better accommodate cyclists who frequent Burnaby Mountain trails and are currently limited to 2 bicycles per bus. Sustainability is a pillar of our walkable community, and we wholeheartedly support the gondola, which represents a regional link to connect Burnaby Mountain to other parts of the Lower Mainland. Number two, alternate egress off Burnaby Mountain. Having an alternate route off Burnaby Mountain is critical. The current university community and SFU population exceeds 40,000 people. People who could be trapped in the event of an extreme snow event, tank farm event, or fire or road closures. There is currently one egress point off Burnaby Mountain that sits directly above the Trans Mountain tank farm. The two roads splitting off from this point are both within the evacuation danger zone should there be an incident at the tank farm. By 2022, the university community will exceed 9,500 people. If the need were to arise to evacuate Burnaby Mountain, due to fire, earthquake, or fire or boil over at the tank farm, the current evacuation plan is to walk off the mountain. This will leave behind children, seniors, people with disabilities, and other vulnerable populations. The risk of being trapped was highlighted recently on Wednesday, July 10th, when all Burnaby Mountain traffic was funneled through University Drive West during a closure of a main campus exit due to work mandated by the Department of Fisheries. This resulted in a massive backlog, with many reporting it take over an hour to exit the mountain. This was a big wake-up for everyone. What a vulnerable and sensitive situation this could quickly become. Also, winters have become a lot more extreme in the last few years, and having a gondola would offer an alternate egress for people on the mountain and potentially offer a way for emergency responders to get to us in the event of an emergency. Finally, this is an opportunity for local business. Another positive outcome would be increased foot traffic for local businesses that struggle on the top of Burnaby Mountain. Since 2006, 35 businesses have opened and closed. Dry cleaners, dollar stores, music stores, optical store, travel agent, and so on. Residents struggle to have access to services, and businesses struggle to pay rent. Having a gondola would draw more foot traffic to the mountain and hopefully add some hope for the remaining businesses and residents who require services. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Our next speaker is Greg Pittipas.
Good morning, mayors and councillors. Thank you for having me here to be able to speak in a railway terminology that allows you to understand what everything is actually doing. I've given you information so that you can follow along. What I'm trying to help everybody understand is that SkyTrain, the term, is simply a service. What you're looking at is in part of the service, what you're looking at is you're looking at light rail, and you're looking at two different versions. You're looking at the Expo Millennium Line system, which has a linear induction motor, and that is a powered fourth rail. So it restricts how the Expo and Millennium lines can be set up. And simply speaking, that means that you cannot have the trains running either in traffic or in a separated guideway that actually crosses crossings where vehicle traffic is going. Most other light rail can go anywhere. The Calgary system, for example, is able to run in traffic in the street, like Toronto streetcars. It runs elevated, like our SkyTrain. It also has subway sections, like our SkyTrain systems. So it can do virtually anything that you need it to do. So we're talking about a restricted one versus unlimited. Now, as I've shown in here, the Canada Line is very similar to the Calgary system. That allows, the only difference with our Canada Line is that we have used a much smaller car than is normal, so it becomes a custom system. So its passenger capacity is only 167 passengers, and when you look at most other systems that are using a Hyundai Rotem subway car, they're about 235. So the similarity is it's much closer to what Calgary has. So you're looking at a difference of somewhere between 67,000 for the Canada Line as a full-size car. Calgary system, their cars are a little bigger, and you're talking about a little over 70,000. And when you're talking about our SkyTrain, the Expo Millennium Line that you're trying to extend, you're talking a maximum capacity of about 780 passengers versus 1,482. So you're roughly 1,500 passengers for Calgary system and your 780. We're talking about sustainability, and the Expo Millennium is about 29 million per kilometer more expensive. So what are you going to do for expansion when it hits 2050 and you're trying to think, oh, well, I want to expand? Anyways, I see that my time is up, and the other two parts that I put in there are the 2011 my own study based on density to support transit, and the 2017 study that was done by the Chicago University of Illinois. They found that high-rises are actually less sustainable than urban sprawl. Thank you for your time, and thank you for listening, and I hope I've helped you.
Thank you very much, Greg.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Daryl De La Cruz.
Good morning, Your Honorable Chair and Mayors. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Daryl De La Cruz. I am a third-year SFU student and the founder of SkyTrain for Surrey. Today I'm here representing over 6,000 petition signatories who help us build local support for the Surrey-Langley SkyTrain, which you'll discuss today. In the early days of our campaign, back in spring 2013, we took a look at some of the numbers on things like population growth and transportation mode share, and what we discovered was astounding. According to numbers released by Metro Vancouver and ICBC, the region's vehicle registration count, that is the number of vehicles that were registered and circulating around our region's roads, increased by 24.3% between 1999 and 2013, where the vast majority of these increases took place was south of Fraser. In the Langleys, there were 80,000 registered vehicles in 1999, and by 2013 there were 120,000, an increase of nearly 40%. Surrey saw even higher increases, from 200,000 in 1999 to nearly 328,000 registered vehicles by 2013, an increase of just over 49%. Surrey and the Langleys saw more growth in vehicle counts than any other city. In other words, they dragged our regional average up. And what this illustrates is one of the major issues that Mayors McCallum, Vandenbroek, and Froese are probably familiar with. We are car-oriented cities. When you hear about increased congestion on corridors like the Tulla Bridge, Lionsgate Bridge, Kingsway, or even the Massey Tunnel, at least part of that is because of what we didn't do back then to bring high-quality rapid transit into south of Fraser cities. Our organization has often highlighted the importance of reducing travel times to attract significantly higher ridership. The previously proposed LRT was not oriented around this, unlike the Surrey-Langley SkyTrain, which, whether staged or built in full, delivers significant time savings and a positive benefit-cost ratio. This is more than just a spine. It is our most important opportunity to shift transportation culture in this part of the region so that we can reduce congestion all over the region. Even a first-stage extension of the SkyTrain to 166th Street in Fleetwood offers massive improvements. Commutes that take up to 30 minutes by a bus in rush hour will be reduced by 1/3 to less than 10 minutes, serving as a new transportation hub for all parts of East Surrey and the Langleys. The Surrey-Langley SkyTrain will reduce overcrowding, offer capacity for future growth, a service that moves quickly and reliably between distant town centers, and economic opportunities for so many areas. We encourage you to take any and all steps to move forward with a Surrey-Langley SkyTrain. Our organization at this point supports all staged options. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Daryl. Our next speaker is Anita Huberman.
I'm Anita Huberman. I'm CEO of the Surrey Board of Trade, and we are presenting to you today to support and make the decision to maintain the status quo, which includes LRT in Surrey. For clarity, the Surrey Board of Trade's position in support of LRT and our continued advocacy for the Mayor's unprecedented, funded 10-year transportation plan, we didn't do it because our previous mayors thought it was a positive economic step for Surrey. Rather, our support and our advocacy for LRT and the Mayor's plan took place given extensive research by us and others showing that in our final determination that LRT would be the most effective means by which to connect the town centers, making transit within Surrey the objective, making Surrey the destination. The L line, with 72% of Surrey's population and businesses in the core areas of Newton, City Centre, Guildford, Fleetwood, Whalley, would create more walkable, livable communities. Also, really being connected to ride-sharing options, building a SkyTrain in phase 1 instead of potentially in phase 2 within the current funding envelope provides an extension only to 160th Street, not to Langley. The decision was made without a business plan, a financial plan, and when you're in business, you need to make sure you have a business plan. before such a significant infrastructure shift. The Surrey Board of Trade notes that a SkyTrain will transition people from Langley to Vancouver, making Surrey a continued suburban brand. You can fit Vancouver, Richmond, and Burnaby in the city limits of Surrey. Current funding will only provide for a minimum amount of rail and stations, as we heard on Friday, and it will be at a very high cost. Surrey needs a transportation infrastructure solution now. We could have had shovels in the ground now. We have been starved of transportation investments in an ongoing way. LRT is not a second-class transportation technology. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anita, and thank you to all of the speakers that came out today. A number of the items that were raised are going to be discussed around the Mayor's Council here today, and we'll be engaging that. But I really appreciate all the folks for coming and sharing their views with the Mayor's Council. As was commented during one of the delegations, we have made some structural changes with the delegations. I think in the past we have been inconsistent with there being delegations in some meetings and not in others to be able to fit into the work programs there. And I think the Mayor's Council wanted to ensure that we do have open delegation in front of all of our meetings, but we need to do it in a way that balances the opportunity for us to deal with the many items that we have to deal with and try and hear from as many speakers as possible. But I do really appreciate all the speakers coming and sharing their insights and thoughts with the Mayor's Council this morning. So with that, we are going to move to item 3.1 on the agenda, which is the next steps for the South Fraser Rapid Transit, and I'm going to have our Jeff Cross introduce the item with a short presentation.
Thank you, Chair. With me is Jeff Busby, who is the project director for the Surrey-Langley SkyTrain. There are two reports in your package dealing with the update to the strategy and to the Surrey-Langley SkyTrain project. We're going to go through them in one item as the recommendations were in the second report, so I'll just kick it off, turn it to Jeff, and then we'll finish with what the proposed next steps may be for your consideration. I think everybody's aware, as many of the speakers have been opining on, that we are basing our analysis as a starting point on the direction that was in the vision coming from 2014, which identified, and even previous to that, the work on rapid transit, the three corridors for priority investment in rapid transit south of the Fraser, specifically in Surrey and Langley, and these are obviously 104 Avenue, King George Boulevard, and Fraser Highway. Per the Mayor's Council vision that was adopted in 2014 as LRT, per our analysis in late last year, the most current estimate to complete that 27 kilometers was $3.55 billion. We had roughly $1.6 billion currently being available, being potentially reallocated from the LRT project towards a new project. And as you see in the report, right now our analysis suggests the inputs that the SkyTrain project that Jeff will go into detail on would be roughly $3.12 billion to do the full length between Surrey and Langley City. In December, you asked us to do several things that are identified in the report. First, as a condition of doing this work, that we get a specific agreement with the City of Surrey to reimburse the region for unnecessary LRT costs. That's contained in the MOU, and we've been working with the Mayor's Council and Board on that. You asked us to proceed with planning towards a business case on the Surrey-Langley SkyTrain and to come back with an interim check-in point, which we are at today, before we proceed with a full business case completion. And in light of that decision to prioritize SkyTrain on Fraser Highway, what are the implications for the other two corridors, understanding both what the options could be from technology and what the costs would be to inform both this first decision and the second. So you see on the left-hand side the 27 kilometers and where that comes to as far as the costing of $3.55 billion at what we are calling a notional envelope. We have the $1.6 billion where we have both federal, provincial, and regional funds allocated. We had a provincial commitment of 40% to the mayor's vision, so that would be against the additional $1.9 billion. We do not yet have full federal funding or regional for beyond the $1.6 billion. So on the right, and we'll get into some more details or some ideas, if we take as a given that the first priority is a SkyTrain between Surrey City Central and Langley, that leaves roughly $0.43 billion to complete within that notional envelope. One plan that we're showing here would be a combination of bus rapid transit and B-line, and we'll go into some of the variations. We're not yet making a recommendation on what the rapid transit refresh would be for those other two corridors. We're just at a preliminary state to be able to help to inform your decision making and potential next steps.
I'll be giving a brief update on the proposed Surrey-Langley SkyTrain project, the culmination of work that's been undertaken since the direction was received in December of last year. As an overview, the project consists of extending the Expo line from the King George Station to Langley City Centre along Fraser Highway. That's a 16-kilometer length, and we are proposing that be constructed as an elevated guideway with 8 stations, 3 major bus interchanges, and park and ride facilities to provide additional access to the extension. In order to operate the expanded Expo line, we would need to expand the SkyTrain fleet and upgrade operations and maintenance facilities, including constructing a new facility to support this line. The map before you identifies the station locations, which were identified in coordination with the City of Surrey, the Township, and the City of Langley at major growth centers and arterial streets where there would be connections to bus transit service. The line would connect the rapidly growing communities of Surrey Centre, Fleetwood, Clayton, and Langley Township and City. We did a round of engagement in April to bring this idea forward to the public, solicit input, and identify the objectives for expanded rapid transit. The objectives that have been identified in the report are listed here. And what we'll be doing, should we receive direction today in the full business case, is fully quantifying all of these objectives and demonstrating the extent to which the project achieves what the public has told us are important to them. This is an outline of our anticipated objectives for the project, including improving the transportation experience, increasing opportunities to housing, jobs, and schools, supporting economic development, and supporting regional goals around healthy communities and a healthy environment. To summarize our findings to date, the project is expected to carry 62,000 riders in the year 2035, growing to 71,000 riders. The basic operating characteristics are described in the report. The line is anticipated to travel between King George and Surrey Centre in 22 minutes. Today, if one was to take a local bus on that same corridor, you could expect to take about 50 minutes. So that generates significant travel times for our users, and when we quantify all the benefits of the project using methodologies that senior government looks to quantify, we find that the benefits in monetary terms exceed the costs, and the ratio is presented here. Total project cost, as you've heard, is $3.12 billion. We recognize that $3.12 billion is may not be available for the project to be delivered all at once, and so we've explored and presented in your report 2 different staging scenarios to build the project in 2 phases over time. So the first staging scenario would build the first phase to Fleetwood. That's a 7-kilometer extension with 4 stations. Less than 10-minute travel time from Fleetwood into Surrey Centre. This stage is achievable within the previously allocated funding for LRT with a cost estimate of $1.63 billion. And if the project was approved in the middle of next year, we would have the project open for service at the end of 2025. The second staging scenario for consideration is going an additional station to the Clayton community. That's 11 kilometers, as I said, 1 additional station. And the cost there is $2.22 billion, so just under $600 million for that additional extension. One of the important aspects of the project and work that is underway is looking at how to minimize impacts on the human and natural environment. So we have a number of studies underway looking at various aspects of the project, and again, should we receive directions, we'll complete this analysis and engage the community, First Nations, and other stakeholders in our findings. We've already engaged a number of stakeholders around some of the sensitive environmental areas of the project, and this is something that is a big focus for our work going forward, should we receive direction today. So this is the next steps. Again, we are providing an update for your consideration. Should we be given direction to continue to pursue the project, we envision at least 2 additional rounds of engagement before the Mayor's Council would be asked to approve an investment plan that would enable the project to move forward. And as I mentioned before, it's a 5.5 years from approval until the project would be in service.
Per the report from management, we are recommending, based on those outputs that Jeff just described, that the project shows a lot of promise against the objectives that we had previously established and refined through the consultation. All rapid transit scenarios deliver on some of those, but a SkyTrain, because of the travel time, reliability, delivers a higher ridership. It is very strong as far as capacity in the future, has less adverse impacts on other users, so good movement and highway users, so it has a lot of strengths. On the adverse side, it is visually more imposing and has more noise associated with it, and is obviously more expensive to build, but does come with some commensurate increases in ridership. As it relates to the other 2 corridors, the work to date, we went out and consulted in the springtime and wanted to make sure that people were very aware with what those options are, considering that we've previously been looking at this almost 10 years ago. So we have a spectrum of options available to us, basically increasing in capacity and speed as you move from left to right. The latter 3 are what we would designate as rapid transit. Our new B-line or rapid bus service is still a conventional system, and the key distinction between that and rapid transit is operating in mixed traffic for a good portion of the actual trip, which then has both limitations on capacity and speed and reliability, but can otherwise deliver a lot of ridership benefits at a low cost. When you transition into bus rapid transit, the key differentiating factor is that you are running in a dedicated right-of-way the entire way. And that is true both with a bus rapid transit and a light rail transit, the only difference between the 2 being the vehicles, and train vehicles being larger and having more capacity, and then there being some perceptions as well with the public. When we move to SkyTrain, then we are grade separated as well, and so that allows for an increased speed and more capacity. So we looked at what the demand is likely to be on the different corridors. We've done some preliminary assessment, including using our transportation model to understand what the ridership would likely be on those other corridors. One of the key findings is that the King George Boulevard has much higher ridership demand and is likely to in the future than the 104th. So one of the options, what you see is the 4th option there that we put forward, was to consider a SkyTrain, which we had not previously done in the alternatives analysis, or had not made the final list, I should say, on King George Boulevard with some sort of rapid bus or BRT on 104 Avenue, and those would meet the capacity in the future. We looked at this as far as what the test of what's achievable within that notional envelope of $3.5 billion that was previously identified for the Mayor's vision, and none of them are fully buildable. None of the rapid transit on 27 kilometers could be completed within that $3.55 billion. We could do a portion of BRT. To a certain degree, BRT is scalable. So you could do a BRT either on one of the corridors, King George Boulevard or 104, and get close. So we have roughly half of the available cost to be able to do that. Versus we would need significantly more funds and more time to be able to complete LRT, even if what that was acceptable to all the communities, a shift obviously from where we were in December, or to move towards SkyTrain on King George. You see some of the estimates on ridership. You start to get more ridership as you increase the speed, but you're able to achieve quite a bit with any of the rapid transit alternatives there. The final column about whether or not you can meet capacity. With BRT, it's very close in the future. The King George Boulevard has high demand right now. It's one of the highest in the region. The first line, the rapid bus, which may seem counterintuitive, could it meet capacity demand in the future? That's because the service is less attractive, so you're able to attract less people and you actually are able to meet the demand, but you see that the ridership levels are less than half, and so you're not achieving the benefits. So then as a result, you see what that might be displayed graphically as a possibility, where we're showing a BRT on King George between Surrey City Centre and Newton, and either a BRT or rapid bus combination on 104 Avenue, assuming that the SkyTrain to Langley is the first priority investment. So we'll leave it at that. These are the recommendations per the chair's report, which amalgamated the two reports combined, and open to any questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jeff, for the report. And I do want to thank actually all of the Translink staff. I know over the past 7 months, a tremendous amount of work has been put into to be able to provide us with the information to get to this particular point. Now, this is probably one of the most difficult and big issues that this council is facing, and this is an important check-in here. I don't think this is the final decision regarding this project, but this is an important check-in to see where this body is at with respect to this. I think the pros and cons between the previous plan and LRT and SkyTrain, it's not black and white. There's advantages and disadvantages to the different approaches compared to where we were to where we are now. But I think the one thing that we did ask initially was to get some numbers to see is, would this new plan be viable? Would it help drive transit ridership? And I think the numbers do speak very clearly that it would have very significant positive impacts in terms of transit rider growth, even more so than the previous plan, and that it does have a solid business case. So I think that's an important starting point for us to be able to consider and understand, and something we did not know back in December when we were first talking about this issue. I think we can all agree, and I think previous mayor's 10-year plan identified south of the Fraser River as a huge priority, and we have seen that region have the fastest growing amount of transit ridership, I think really demonstrating that there is a lot of latent demand and strong desire for improved transit service. And that growth has occurred really simply with just investment in the bus service. So I think there is a lot of merit, regardless of where we go, to really recognize south of the Fraser does have, given its fast growing patterns, land use patterns, does need more transit service. So as Jeff mentioned, we had two of our subcommittees had a look at this matter, and I think that was important to give as many eyes on a project this complex and important. Ultimately, I have taken the two recommendations and taken the major points and put them together, and I don't believe I've lost anything from the two committees, and that's what we see up on the screen here. I think this is probably a good starting point for our conversation, but I'd now like it to open up to the floor for any discussion, questions, or comments before we jump into the recommendation. So don't be shy. Mayor Froese.
Thank you very much. All I want to say is I just want to ask the chair, when the recommendation does come on the floor, I would like to move it, but I would like to move with some changes. So I don't want to inhibit anybody from speaking prior to the recommendation going on, but if that's okay with you, I'll hold off. And then once I've made that, I'd like to speak to the motion.
Okay, well, I'd like to open it up to discussion first and use this motion as a starting point, but then we're certainly open to the table in terms of any changes that the body wishes. Mayor Walker?
Thank you, Chair, and I guess I might just as well jump straight into it. Everything about this recommendation looks good, And it's not because I don't necessarily agree that it's a very important part of what is going to be done in Metro Vancouver and the transit system over the next number of years. My concern, and I voiced it a few times before, and I want to reiterate it today, it appears to address a certain piece of the needs of Metro Vancouver, Surrey, and Langley primarily, and it leaves out the needs, from my perspective, of a very large part of the rest of south of Fraser. That includes the area that I represent, White Rock. It includes the South Surrey area that is Mayor McCallum's responsibility. There are a growing number of people moving into our particular area, and if the funding for this goes forward, my concern is that the funding for other pieces of it, and I don't mean SkyTrain, I don't even mean light rapid transit, I simply mean some kind of a bus system that's going to get us from A to B, get us from myself to Richmond, myself to Surrey, is not going to be available. And so I'm afraid for that reason alone, I cannot support it. I understand the ridership, and I understand that that's exceedingly important. So is the ridership from a number of other areas in south of Fraser. And so I think we need to look a little bit deeper into where all of the money is going to go and what impact that is going to have on where the money is not going to be able to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Dingwall.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll have a few comments to make. One, I think I do want to congratulate Translink staff. The amount of information that you've been able to gather and digest over the last 8 months and come back to this group, I think is impressive. I think the numbers that you've brought before us are better than originally anticipated. And so again, I just want to say thank you for all the work that you did. The second one, we've heard concerns from delegations today and in the past around various technologies and options, everything from rail right out to Hope, to LRT, BRT, SkyTrain, and all the pros and cons that are attached to that. In one delegation in particular today, I know that one of the motives was really around centralizing transit within Surrey and Surrey as a destination, and some of that rings true to me, and I understand why that is, and Surrey will be the biggest city in the Metro Vancouver area, I have no doubt, in the future, and so there's value in that as well. But I guess where I'm going with my thoughts here, and the Surrey Council wanted to switch technologies, and I think this body understood that. And our big concern is really around costs, and I think the costs have come in better than I know I thought they were going to be. But what's happened here now is the original proposal around LRT that went from Guildford to Surrey City Central down to Newton, and then all the way out to Langley was built on LRT technology. I have no problem, quite frankly, in voting in favor of the mayor's 10-year vision for transit options from Surrey out to Langley. And if it's SkyTrain, that's fine. We've heard today that comes in at $3.12 billion. I'm okay with that. That's within that 3.55 that was originally anticipated. And that way we're delivering what the three mayors are looking for. And we're within budget. We still don't have the funding for the second part, but at least it matches that vision. Where I'm concerned, and similar to my colleague Mayor Walker, is that quite frankly, what scares me is that the other option, which is really the Newton-Guildford city center one, I hope we're not setting priorities at the expense of other areas. And we've heard the North Shore. We've heard about the Northeast sector. And we know that when you build rapid transit options such as LRT or SkyTrain technology, that it provides opportunities for density, for access to citizens in all of those big areas. And when you throw on top of that the SkyTrain discussions around going to UBC, it's going to push out priorities for the northeast sector and also the North Shore years and years and years. And I'm hoping, if I'm still on this council when that discussion comes back, that I would quite rightfully support the SkyTrain through Surrey to Langley. I think that makes sense. They are big centers, but I don't want to see the next phase go to Guildford and to Newton and in some sort of LRT or SkyTrain technology. It's time for equity and fairness and having both a north-south but an east-west connection amongst all of Metro Vancouver that provides access to our citizens and services and density and even revenue to those cities that are getting it. So again, Mr. Chair, I think we need to pull 2B and have it voted on separately. That is a whole different ballgame that, quite frankly, scares the hell out of me because, like Mayor Walker, the rest of us will be pushed out for many, 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 many years if we do a phase 3 that deals with any sort of cost of overruns above the $3.55 million.
So appreciate your comments, Mayor Dingwall, and definitely understand in terms of kind of some of the concerns you have about what happens in future phases there, and maybe I will get staff to comment a little bit more. But I think as it was presented to us, in the current mayor's 10-year plan, there is $3.5 billion allocated to rapid transit south of the Fraser River. If we did switch to SkyTrain technology, that would limit the funding to Guildford and Newton, likely to some combination of rapid bus and bus rapid transit would all that would be able to afford there. I think if this body did want to consider, or there were reasons to consider anything beyond that, to me, the way I see it is that punts that out of phase 3 and into that longer term, where then those projects could be considered in combination with other regional priorities if we are getting out of the scale that was originally contemplated there. So that's my understanding of how that would happen if there were other considerations there. And to me, I think if it's within the $3.5 billion envelope, then it's part of the existing plan. If it's anything that begins to exceed that then that becomes a larger conversation that does have to be then compared with many other regional priorities that we have across Metro Vancouver. Jeff, I don't know if you can elaborate on that point.
No, Chair, that's consistent with our understanding is that we wanted to make sure you understood, since there has been discussion, questions in the public, stakeholders, et cetera, about what would the options be, thus doing an updated costing to say what's doable within the envelope and what's outside of the envelope. And assuming it's significantly outside of the envelope that was in the mayor's vision, then the default position would be, if there was desire around this table to explore it, that it would go into the Transport 2050 hopper for funding at a future stage beyond the completion of the 10-year vision.
So thank you both, Mr. Cross and Mr. Chair. 2B speaks exactly that, going outside. And we already know through general estimates, and I take Translink's advice soundly, that, and they've listed on page 31 of our report the various costs for that other technology. We already know that. What scares me is if you plan, it helps lead to setting it as a priority because you already have the plans in place. We heard today about a gondola. And we also heard from other mayors, including my friend across the table, around need for more rapid bus or B lines and that sort of thing. But when you start to plan, and that's what 2B is about, is planning and getting those estimates, that's what ends up coming into fruition. So that scares the hell out of me, as I said, that I think there are other regions that require some attention and to service the citizens in, for instance, those 6 communities. So West Van, North Van District, Poco, Pitt Meadows, and Maple Ridge, for instance, and that's not including my friend in White Rock, for instance. So that's my concern. And Delta. You can see we lined up over here, but yeah. And my friends across the way.
Thank you, Mayor Dingwall. Mayor McEwen.
Thank you. I wanted to ask Mr. Cross, in the report that he presented, there was a benefit cost ratio for the three different alternatives, and they were 1.24, 1.12, 1.17. Was that ever done with the original 10-year vision plan?
Mayor McEwen, so we didn't have a staging scenario like this. So what Jeff was presenting was on the different stages for the Fraser Highway. We had looked at it completely, but yes, benefit cost ratios were done for the different corridors. This benefit cost ratio is fairly similar to what we brought forward to you back in December of this year when we looked at the 2017 figures that we thought were roughly around 1 for that. They have been different for the other corridors. For the King George Boulevard, 104 Avenue had actually a lower benefit cost ratio. That's partly to do with the travel times, not necessarily just about ridership, but the longer travel times and the benefits to drivers.
I guess what it brings up is the fact that, you know, I'm one of 5 returning mayors to this table, and as I reiterated when we started to go down this path back in November, you know, we need to look at this as a regional issue. These are regional tax dollars. They're coming in from the federal government and the provincial government. And again, it has to be to facilitate the needs of the region. And I'm a little concerned that, you know, where we were, we fought tooth and nail just to get to where we were with the 10-year vision, and it served a lot more people than what this is proposing to serve right now. So I will not be supporting it at this point. I think that since our conversation in November, there's been a lot of comments regarding funding coming from different levels of government. I have not seen any of it, and I've actually heard from one level, from the provincial person in charge, that there is no more funding for it. So I don't know where that funding is going to be coming from. And as my colleague and friend across the way, Mayor Dingwall, said, you know, you start going down these paths, it's the sort of the death by 1,000 cuts, and all of a sudden you're too far in it to pull out. So I will not be supporting it as it stands. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other comments or questions before we get into the Mayor Brody?
First of all, Mr. Chair, I have a couple questions to staff. In none of the reports have I seen any reference to the agricultural land reserve. And as I understand it, if this fully goes out to Langley, there is a major portion that is going to go over agricultural land. What has been done in that respect to make sure that we can, if we go ahead, we carry it through?
So the project of the 16.5 kilometers has about 2.5 kilometers crossing the Serpentine River Valley. That is in the agricultural land reserve. However, the reference design that we've used to develop the cost estimates stays entirely within road right-of-way. So there is no land impact to the agricultural land reserve. As I mentioned, we have the environmental assessment underway. One of the issues we're looking at is any other impacts beyond right-of-way impacts that may occur to agricultural lands, and that would be information that we would bring forward prior to the project being approved.
Well, I don't know exactly the process for the ALC, but if you're wanting to build on a road right-of-way, which is in the ALR, do you still have to get permission?
My understanding is that some activities are permitted without any ALC process. We're still working with the ALC members around the specific requirements, and there may be something around the construction that would require a permit. That's something that, as I said, we'll be finalizing prior to the project being approved in terms of understanding exactly those requirements. I also neglected to mention that we did not propose any stations in the agricultural land reserve. Again, there is the major north-south highway there, but we didn't think it was appropriate to propose stations there, both for technical reasons, but also to ensure that we weren't perhaps falsely indicating that there should be some development that could occur around those stations.
Well, also because there's no people around there, so that's another good reason. My second question is about to Mr. Cross. You mentioned that the travel time on SkyTrain from Langley City to the King George SkyTrain station would be 22 minutes. Is that correct? I got that right?
Correct.
What is the potential travel time if you have LRT?
I believe from the previous estimates it was around 30 minutes. We have not modeled specifically gone beyond the work that we had done in 2017 to develop the LRT option.
Okay, roughly 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So what we're doing here is to save 8 minutes. We're doubling the cost, basically. And I think people should keep that one in mind. I think an important feature of this recommendation is number 5. Limit funding available for the first phase of the SkyTrain project to the 1.63 already secured through phase 2 plan of the 10-year vision. And that addresses this possibility that somebody, one of the proponents, may want to go to Clayton, thus taking up, another $500 million or so, and displacing other aspects of phase 2. And I think it's very important that we make it clear that the funding envelope in phase 2 is 1.63, and as staff has already said, when you get into phase 3, then there's going to be a competition for any further funding requests. Just because you're using up basically, over $3 billion on this line to Langley doesn't mean that in phase 3 there's going to be an extra amount of money to compensate for the fact that that is the choice that Surrey has made. So I think that's an important ingredient of this. And my final question is about the execution of the MOU that is attached to the report, which is marked 3.1 Annex A. Who will be signing that?
It is proposed that the Mayor of Surrey would sign on behalf of the City of Surrey, and that the CEO, upon the endorsement by this body and the board, would sign on behalf of Translink.
So is it the endorsement of this board, the Mayor's Council, or the Translink board?
This Mayor's Council would be in accepting, or if you went forward with this recommendation, the MOU, the draft MOU as attached would be, we would assume be endorsed per the direction we've been receiving in the feedback from the Joint Finance Committee and the Joint Planning Committee.
All right. So I would think that if we want to go ahead with this, that we better add something to these recommendations to authorize, to endorse the MOU, and to authorize the execution by Translink staff of the document, because it's assumed in all the documents, but as Mr. Cross says, upon endorsement, well, we haven't endorsed it yet. So I think we need to come back and make at least that change to these recommendations.
So we can come back to that, and I think, Mayor Brody, your point is that it'd be the Mayor's Council that would be the endorsing body for that. Is that what you're looking for?
Well, I'm not sure whether the Translink board has to endorse it as well, but I think that the Mayor's Council at least has to endorse it, and I'll leave the rest of the process up to greater minds. But I think that we need to endorse it for our part.
I've made a note of that, and we will come back to that when we are looking at the motion on the table. Mayor Little.
Thank you, Chair Cote. First of all, there are some good things in this recommendation, some things that I do think we need to support. Some of them come from the recommendations from the Joint Finance Group, and I'd say that they make sense, particularly number 5, limiting the funding available for the first phase. I think that's critically important, but I don't want to tie ourselves down to one particular avenue at this point. My overarching concern, and staff will probably shake their head because I've said this a ton of times, is that you have to imagine the system as a whole. When someone comes into the system, they pick up their seat with them. And whether they're going on SkyTrain, on a bus, on a C bus, doesn't matter where they're going, they're taking that one seat with them wherever they go. Now, if somebody's average commute is 35 kilometers versus somebody's average commute being 5 to 10 kilometers, I can turn over the 5 to 10 kilometer seat 5 times, 6 times, 7 times in a peak hour period. But when the average commutes start getting longer and longer and longer, the efficiency of our system is going to fall apart and fail. And this is one of my critical challenges with the extension proposal, because it seems to be entirely couched on getting people into the downtown core. I realize that it has the benefit of having some bidirectional traffic in some instances, but it doesn't seem to be supporting the regional growth strategy. It seems to be supporting drawing people into the downtown peninsula. And the struggle with that is it's 47 kilometers from the middle of Langley City to Burrard in Georgia. 47 kilometers. This is fueling sprawl like you wouldn't believe. My community, the average commute to those major employment centers down there is about 12, 13 kilometers. But we don't have this level of service coming to our community. Our community is largely stuck in cars, largely stuck on bridges because we don't have the rapid infrastructure. And so here we are putting an incredible amount of funds to extend the system in such a way that it is going to bring that average commute time way up, or not time way up, but the amount of time in our system way up, to the point that you can't efficiently turn over the equipment in peak hour periods. This is my long-standing frustration with this extension. Yes, we can measure our efficiency and the number of people we can draw into the system, but if the average commutes are going up and up and up, we're failing. We're not allowing Surrey Central to reorganize as a regional center. We're not allowing the commercial businesses to take place in Langley City and have the traffic be drawn into Langley City, drawn into Surrey. Instead, we're having people commute through those regions into the employment centers of the peninsula. And I think that's a failure of this strategy. So my view is that we don't take a single dollar out of the South of Fraser corridor, that we entirely endorse and support that the funds are tied up in projects going forward for South of Fraser, but I happen to agree with the Surrey Board of Trade on this one. I think the better way to develop the economy of Surrey into a commercial and regional center is by having a separate system. And I think that LRT better addresses that issue.
Thank you. Mayor Harvey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the good news from the reports are that there is a solid business case. Very glad to see that and appreciate the work the Translink staff have done. Could Mr. Cross please explain 2B recommendation?
Yes, Mayor. So basically what we're saying at this point, we're not in a position to make any recommendations on the ultimate benefits and costs of the different technologies. Within 2A, we know what's doable within the $3.55 billion. Based on the updated cost right now, there are different options outside of the $3.55 billion, up to $1 billion more than that. That may have different trade-offs. What we're seeing for pursuing rail on one of the other corridors is it comes with more cost, up to $1 billion more if we were to go on King George with SkyTrain, but you do get a fair bit more ridership. And so what we're suggesting with this is that we would continue to do some of that analysis to complete that so that you can go in with that information to decide what to do with that. If there was a desire to proceed to complete the 27 kilometers per the current mayor's vision within the 10 years, then you are basically going on a path of some sort of bus-based. If you decided to wait it out until more money was available or at some future date based on the other priorities of the region, then you could do so knowing what the trade-offs were in a better sense of what the ridership, the development impacts would be, et cetera.
Thank you. And looking at the George Massey Tunnel replacement, and we just had the meeting, as you know, yesterday on that, an update, and it seems to be proceeding, which I'm very happy with. What funding is going to be available to take opportunity within the next 4 years is what they have visioned, of opening a new crossing, whatever their choice is. What opportunities are there funding to have a very robust rapid bus system along the Highway 99 corridor for South Surrey, for White Rock, for the Tsawwassen First Nations, for Delta, and for Richmond? Is there any way we can take advantage of that project by enhancing much-needed improvements in the bus service in those areas?
As it exists right now, we have not identified those corridors for substantial capital infrastructure within the Mayor's vision. I do know you're aware, Mayor, that we've been having discussions with MOTI as far as interim measures per the objectives of the Minister and the possibility of looking at some interventions and increased service and prioritization to be able to provide some relief in the interim before any crossing is replaced.
My concern is that this is supposed to be a regional forum for improvements, and not all the region is being serviced at all. So if there's, I support the project, and I support my friend sitting next door to me here as part of his campaign. I fully respect that, but I'll have to have assurances that it's not going to limit and reduce and starve out the municipalities that are hoping for some improvements.
Per the recommendation, which is within 2A, working within the $3.55 billion within the 10 years, which is now another 6 to 7 years, given that we started implementing the vision in 2017, it would not shift any of the other priorities that have been identified, including, and there's a accompanying report further on in your package, including the 5 more B lines, more service expansion, et cetera.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Director McCutcheon?
Thank you. So through the chair, just a question of clarification. If we went with number 5, so we're sticking with 1.63, how does that impact 2A? And I guess it comes to a question of what is the growth projections for growth in the other areas? So the Newton Exchange and Guildford kind of versus going all the way to Langley. We heard about sort of wanting to have Surrey connected within itself, as Mayor Little pointed out. So I'm wondering if we went with 5, is number 1 saying, assuming that that 3.55 will take a SkyTrain all the way to Surrey and then look at other options across, sorry, all the way to Langley and then other options throughout the rest of Surrey?
Director McCutcheon, if I'm understanding your question correctly, so yeah, the $1.63 billion that's sort of currently allocated then would get us to Fleetwood, which per the update from Jeff Busby is a promising project in and of itself. Then per what's recommended in 3 that we would look at sequencing going forward as funding became available. There's a provincial commitment towards the $3.55 billion. It'd be around the additional federal funding and regional funding to be able to complete what we can do within $3.55 billion. It is important, that connection between Surrey Central and Langley is important per Mayor Little's comments and questions in that regard. That is a very strong and growing regional economic corridor. And our analysis right now shows that increasingly trips are being contained south of the Fraser, especially between Fraser Valley and within Surrey Central, and that even the analysis for a SkyTrain would have over 60% of the riderships not going into the Burrard Peninsula, staying south of the Fraser. So we'll come back with that analysis of what it does. We do see increasing benefits the further east we go with the SkyTrain.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, the growth projections would suggest that, you know, if you got to Fleetwood, if we had X amount of money left to get to 3.5, extending the SkyTrain would, all the way to Langley eventually, would be kind of a better, matching the growth projections better than the other 2 routes?
We haven't done them as a comparison against the different routes, and that's a policymaker discussion. But per the sort of standing direction of improving transportation outcomes and connecting the regional centers per the regional growth strategy, that's why we would pursue that.
Okay, and I'm sorry, but just to really clarify that, then the $3.55 billion, if we voted in favor of 2A, that is looking towards the SkyTrain all the way to Langley.
That is our assumption right now, is that the priority from this table would be to submit a business case that is ultimately a Surrey Centre to Langley business case with staging, with the first stage being Fleetwood in this scenario, other staging based on how much funding comes forward.
Thank you. Mayor Stewart.
Thank you. And And I sat here first, so I don't want anyone to think that I'm coming in between Surrey and Langley. But I have some of the same concerns that have been expressed, including by Mayor Little, related to the ridership. I looked at the ridership, which is on the unmarked table on page 16, and compared it to the map then on page 14. The map shows that to get to 166, you've gone 40% of the way to Langley, and you've captured 2/3 of the ridership, and from the full scenario. And so I worry that have we done the cost-benefit analysis then? If we went with the stage one, if we built half the soccer field, I always compared it to building half a soccer field because we didn't have enough money to build all of a soccer field, so we're going to build half a soccer field and we'll build the other half when we get more money. We're going to get halfway to, or 40% or 50% of the way to Langley. If we do that, does the second half of the project make sense?
Fair question, and we heard that in December. That was one of the key questions we need to explore. Is there a stage one project, if no additional funding is available, that makes sense? And what we're finding is that extension to Fleetwood does make sense. It has a positive business case, and in fact, the segment between completing from Fleetwood to Langley City actually brings commensurate more benefits for the cost than even the first segment. And that's partly because of the ridership that's generated and the longer trips and the reduction in travel time for other drivers and savings and costs, et cetera, associated with that.
But not in ridership, obviously, because we don't improve the ridership. We double the track, but don't double the ridership. And so, I'm worried we get to Fleetwood, and then the next project just never gets to be a priority in Langley. The goal of the Mayor's Council 5 years ago in developing the Mayor's plan was to get a rail out to Langley, and we'll end up with rail partway to Langley and serving the needs of Surrey. But in some ways, although I also agree with Ms. Huberman that Coquitlam used to have a promised LRT line. We wanted it, we fought hard for it, and the provincial government took it away and said, no, it has to be SkyTrain technology, and we ended up with a different type of development. It isn't the development we were planning, and it was, in fact, at that point, we'd even designed all the stations for the LRT line along the Evergreen route. And it switched to a different form of urban development that's commensurate with SkyTrain. So I understand what the Surrey Board of Trade where the Surrey Board of Trade is coming from, in that I can't imagine the economic development realities, as Mayor Little said, for portions of Surrey, and that was ultimately part of the goal here, was to try to achieve good things for Surrey and not. So I'm left with, we read these newspaper articles that say, well, as soon as this Mayor's Council was elected, it voted to switch to SkyTrain. I remember that vote. Almost all of us voted against that, but 4 people did vote. 3 of them are on the table now to go in that direction, and it's been referred to since then as the Mayor's Council voting to switch to SkyTrain. We haven't done that yet, and I think at some point, all of us, we're going to have to get some consensus on which is the technology we use. I'm fine if the numbers work out here, but ultimately what it means is that we end up with buses on 2 routes that deserve a rail line in order to support a more expensive rail line on a bus on a route that had previously been designed for rail. So I'm torn again.
Thank you. Mayor Buchanan.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you very much. Just a question to staff at this point. Sorry, now I've lost my page. Mr. Cross, you mentioned 5.5 years, or sorry, it might have been the other Jeff. 5.5 years. Is that 5.5 years to completion of the first phase out to Fleetwood? Can you just
So we've looked at the various staging scenarios, and one of the, I guess, perhaps counterintuitive findings is that of all the different scenarios, it's 5.5 years to complete the project. So if priorities were such that we were given direction to build all the way to Langley in one go, 5.5 years from that date. If we are building the project in stages, the first stage would open also 5.5 years. That seems counterintuitive because we're building less. The reason for that is that there are fixed times that don't vary based on the project length. So at the beginning of the project, there's a fixed time for the work that we need to do to procure the project, to bring on the contractors. And then at the end of the project, there's also fixed time that's required to test and commission and make sure the system is ready for operations. And so there's about a 2.5-year actual construction period in the schedule that you see in the report, and that doesn't necessarily vary significantly depending on the length of the project, because based on the advice we've gotten from our construction advisors, the contracting community would scale their crews to be able to deliver within that window. So to kind of summarize that, if we built the first stage, which is as you see in the recommendation, we would have the project opening at the end of 2025 for full revenue service, and that assumes that the project is approved in the summer of next year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Froese.
Thank you very much. I think you've exhausted the list, and so what I would like to do is I'd like to move the recommendation, and then immediately after I have an amendment. I think it would be more appropriate to have the amendment separately rather than incorporating in the motion, so that there may be some debate on that. So I would move the recommendation as it is.
Is there a seconder? It's been seconded.
Thank you. So it looks like the Langleys have moved and seconded this. We seem to have some stake in this. I'm going to put the amendment on now so we can debate that. And my amendment is, and point 5 has been pointed out a couple of times as being important, and I think it's very important. I'd just like to see some clarification on point 5. So my amendment would be, oh, we lost it on the screen. Oh, okay. Oh, there we go. Technical malfunction. The first word is limit. I'd like to change that to words that are start with. And then the word after SLS project that says to the 1.63 billion. I'd like to change the word to with. And then after the semicolon, the words, and further continue the process to secure funding from provincial and federal sources to complete the Mayor's 10-year vision to ensure that the Surrey-Langley SkyTrain is fully constructed to Langley. That would be my amendment. I'll pass it over to you. You want to pass it? Did you get it all? Okay. If you can read my chicken scratch handwriting. So we'll get that on there.
So we'll just get it all up on the screen. So just to clarify, because I know the intent of the original motion that came from the Finance Committee was to put a boundary around the 1.6 available in Phase 2, and I think the big fear from that committee was that the project might increase in scope and that other projects from Phase 2 might actually suffer with if that there, and that was the intent of that motion. I guess I want some clarification, Mayor Froese, if this is in addition to that intent or in any way is not supportive of that intent, because I think we need clarification.
No, and hopefully the wording is clear enough, and we can always tweak that. But my intent is that the 1.63 billion is the limit that we have now, that we don't go beyond that. So we're starting with that amount. But I don't want to lose sight that we want to get this line to Langley. This is part of our vision, was to get rail to Langley, so that we continue the process, which is basically the phase 3 funding, which has always been in the works in this mayor's vision, that phase 3 was going to be the place where we got the funding to put rail along Fraser Highway to Langley. That was always the intent. So I just want to make sure that that's clear, that the intent is still to seek phase 3 funding to bring rail to Langley. Until the change in December to look for this business case, rail wasn't coming to Langley in phase 2, and rail is still not coming to Langley in phase 2. But the intent of the vision was to get rail to Langley, and so I don't want to lose sight of that. I hope that's clear, and I hope the wording is clear. But it's been seconded, has it?
Is there a seconder to the amendment that's been put forward? Okay, so that's been seconded. We will now open up the floor to talk about the amendment. Mayor Brody.
The way the recommendations have been originally talks about looking at the consequences of exceeding the $3.55 billion funding envelope, including impacts on a likely time frame, et cetera. And 2A is considers combinations of alternatives within the 3.55. It has been suggested by Surrey and Langley that we should have SkyTrain, which is twice as expensive as light rail. That has been the 10-year vision plan. And I think it would be a mistake to lock us into saying we're going to continue any process to secure funding from any sources to ensure that the SLS is fully constructed. As far as I'm concerned, they have to work within that 3.55, and there's no guarantees after that. So I'm not going to support the amendment.
Mayor Froese?
Maybe I hear what you're saying. That's why I want to make sure that we're clear on our both. I think we're both speaking the same language. We just trying to say the same thing differently. If we added within the 3.55 billion envelope to the end of that, is that something that would? I just want to eat. My concern is that now I hear at the table around the table saying, what about me? What about us? And Langley is no different. I've been mayor for 8 years, and in the beginning there was no rail coming to Langley, and we've been saying, and our residents saying, what about us? We're not getting our fair share. I mean, we all hear that, and so I want to make sure that the intent of the mayor's vision is followed here, and it was rail to Langley. And I never want to argue on what the technology is, and I'm not an engineer, but we are looking towards SkyTrain. I think SkyTrain does suit the needs of Langley far better than light rail, and also the region, and I'll get into that later. But I just want to make sure that the intent is that we're not looking to go beyond the 3.55. That's been there. I want to make sure that Langley isn't forgotten. That doesn't stop at Fleetwood. It carries on, and I've got more to say later, but that's really the intent, Mayor Brody.
Okay, Mayor Brody.
Well, I see later on the agenda we're going to talk 5.1, completing the vision and the next investment plan. And then we have the 10-year vision implementation plan updates for the B-lines. It would seem to me that we have been talking and continue to speak about trying to accelerate that phase 3 funding. So that is still the plan, and this, to me, introduces unnecessary complications in that, when there are all kinds of caveats and problems that we could incur that would have an impact on this.
So maybe I'm going to actually put Jeff and maybe Kevin on the spot on this question. Between the original wording and this wording, I actually don't see a dramatic difference on how Translink would approach that, but I'd like to see how this motion would be interpreted and acted upon there, so that the body understands what the difference might be.
So within the existing motion that was tabled before the amendments, we would interpret, looking at the two, number 3 and number 5, as kind of our implementation framework. Number 5 first tells us that We are not to reallocate any resources within the Phase 2 plan. So we're working with a business case submission right away for $1.63 billion. So that would be our starting point. I'm not sure that the amendment that Mayor Froese put forward would change any of that strategy to us. And that we would, per number 3, continue with the support of the Mayor's Council to be seeking the funding to fully fund the $3.55 billion vision, which means the federal share of the outstanding sort of $1.9 billion in rapid transit that has not been funded. So I don't think it changes necessarily for us at all.
Let me just add to that as well, because I think that's coming through in some of the concerns raised by some of the mayors around the table. And included in that, in the Phase 3 funding, is the next step for all the bus service improvement as well. This body has funded us through the first 5 years of the 10-year plan, fully funded through 2021. By the end of 2021, we will have increased the bus system by 18%. The 10-year vision assumes we will increase the bus system by 25%. That includes 5 additional B-lines that are not yet funded into and through many of your communities. So in addition to that, I think we may be losing sight, and I think that's coming out in a few of your comments. It's not just this notional $3.5 billion envelope for capital dollars for rapid transit south of Fraser. As we start working with you on the Phase 3 funding and the scope of Phase 3, there's a lot of bus service that still needs to be added in the system. Not only that, of course, we're doing the long-range vision, which will introduce other rapid transit, high-capacity transit ideas throughout the region for the next 10-year plan beyond that. So I hope you don't lose sight. And, sort of to Mayor Dingwall's, fear that this might suck away any other attention to the other priorities. So to your point, Mayor Cote, Chair Cote, would we do anything different? We are focused on bringing to you avenues on how to accomplish the 10-year vision, which is fully multimodal, which is ensuring, in our opinion, that the still very, very important bus system continues to get the resources it needs in the nearer term going forward. Last year, bus ridership grew faster than any other mode in the system, including SkyTrain. We know there's a lot of latent demand in the bus system. We have to continue to push that. So I would hope, and maybe that needs to be, Mayor Froese, some of the language that needs to be incorporated into your motion. It's not just the rapid transit south of Fraser. It's completing the entire 10-year vision, which is multimodal, and will deliver resources and benefits to all of your communities.
Okay, so just for clarification for this body, because I know the intent of the original motion was based on fear that potentially Phase 2 for other projects in Phase 2 might be reallocated to the project, which I think was the intent of the limit wording on there. With this amended wording, does that remain the same, or does that in any way change from Translink's perspective?
It doesn't change anything in that regard. We will go forward with a $1.63 billion business case at this point, pending any additional funding for the Phase 3 plan, as Kevin discussed.
Okay, so I'm not seeing a dramatic difference with the amendment in terms of how any of this will be interpreted or acted upon. So I would like to get back to the main body with or without the amendment. But Mayor Dingwall, do you have a comment on the amendment?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as I mentioned in my earlier comments, I do support all 3 mayors with the line out to Langley. And I don't think the amendment changes that. And we've just heard from the CEO and Vice President Cross to that very point. My preference clearly would be to stick with the original motion, which we reviewed coming into here. I think the vision still stands. I think you're going to see the support in the next phase to try and deal with all of those improvements, including the Langley corridor. So my preference is clearly to stick with the original motion on number 5. And before we move on everything, I just harken back. I come back to the chair on pulling 2B and voting on that.
And I will definitely be separating particularly those items. Mayor McCallum?
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Chair. Just on the amendment, I support the amendment, maybe for a different reason. I think when we're looking so much to federal and provincial government for funding on the whole region's priority, as soon as they read the word limit in anything on any point, it starts to not be a sign that we're sort of picking one particular area or one other area. That's what it will be interpreted by the federal and provincial governments. Because of that word, I think, and it doesn't change any meaning of the main motion, to use words like start with, at least gives us the sort of a non-negative type to the federal and provincial government. But the limit does send a message, and because they're going to say, what are you going to limit? And so I think it's very, very important that that particular word be changed, just for the fact that it sends a very negative picture to the federal and provincial government, which, as we all know, with a federal election especially coming, that they're looking to this body, this metro area, for the possibility of some additional funds. So I think that word's absolutely critical to be taken out. And I just want to make a couple of comments, and when the main motion comes up, I'll make some more in this point. But as far as Surrey, and I think I can speak for the two Langleys also, I can speak for White Rock and South Surrey. I have always recognized in this region that we need to all work together. We all have priorities. And I have supported in my past being chairman of Translink, and by my improvement of the people of Surrey, in making sure that all areas get better transportation in their communities, whether they're small, medium, or large. I think our staff had just pointed out that this particular project that we are working on now in the 10-year plan doesn't stop any of the other cities' monies or projects that are in the 10-year plan. We're not asking to go outside of any parameters in the 10-year thing that was passed. For Surrey, we will stay within, or request to stay within this $3.5 billion. And so a lot of the talk I'm hearing around the table is thinking that we're going to sort of go out of that and at the expense of the other cities. We have no intention of doing it. We're going to stay in what the 10-year plan and the mayor's approved, and there's a couple sitting around this table. In that 10-year plan is your projects, all of that you approved. This isn't going to affect them at all. It's just our part of that 10-year plan. So the concern that some of you have, I think, is to the point where you're thinking that maybe your projects in the 10-year plan are would not happen because the money may be going to other projects. That's not going to happen, and I will vote against any of that. I'm going to vote for our 10-year plan, and together with the cities, all the projects in the region when we go forward. So I just want to make a very clear point that I'm a big believer that as a group we need to work together so that we're seen by other levels of government that we're working together for all parts of the region, small, medium, or large, because that's the important point of this body here right now. And so, again, certainly by putting limits on, that goes against some of what this board stands for. So I very, very strongly support the lease taking out or the amendment that's before us. And as you heard from staff, it's not going to make any difference in any of your projects that you have within the 10-year plan.
Thank you. Mayor West?
Thank you very much. And just a couple of questions to Mr. Cross. Mr. Cross, can you speak to your confidence that the project, the full project, if we were to take SkyTrain to Langley City, that could in fact be completed within the $3.55 billion envelope? I note in the report it talks about the addition of $5 million in cost every month. Given, I mean, my understanding is, given at this point we're not clear on when the second phase of construction from Fleetwood to Langley would occur, can you just speak to your confidence around the ability to remain within that envelope, that funding envelope that the motion speaks to, or the amendment speaks to? And what would be the consequence to the other projects that are supposed to be in south of the Fraser, that are supposed to be funded within that envelope, if all of a sudden the SkyTrain extension from Clayton to Langley is not the $3.12 billion that it's currently estimated to be? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor West. So Jeff can help me with some of that. You've pointed to a fact that the numbers that we put forward assume that the construction is done as one project. That doesn't mean that it necessarily needs to be approved all at once, that there are, as we pointed out, staging scenarios, potentially going forward with what's here about the limiting to $1.63 billion, where we put in a business case for that, but we're putting in the business case for the complete project. And if additional funding comes available during the procurement phase, that we're able to exercise through an option sort of approach to do this all as one project, then we're in around that $3.1 billion. As to our confidence on that, we're feeling fairly good, though things can change. Part of our confidence comes from our previous estimates. We're not that different from this, and so we have a pretty good experience. Plus, we're in the market right now with SkyTrain on Broadway. As to if it did, for some reason, get staged and we had to wait another year, that adds, if it was a year, roughly right now our estimate is about $60 million that it adds to that. But that then gets balanced against other priorities about what funding is actually coming in, what our revenue streams look like. All of our projects flex a little bit. You know, from the mayor's vision of the time we put this together in 2014, from the time that we actually implement them. We're using that as the guidelines in the framework, but we'll bring back to you the exact financial implications. Some of our revenues have been higher, some have been lower, and so then we'll look at that as far as a trade-off.
Thank you. And can you just address the second part of the question? So if the Surrey to Langley SkyTrain were to exceed the $3.12 billion, that comes then at the expense of the other projects south of Fraser that are to be funded within the $3.55 billion envelope?
Depends on what the available senior government fundings and the wishes of this body are. So that's a wait and see, but the approach right now that we're taking is that if you went forward with this, that 3.55 is the envelope. That may adjust a little bit based on the estimates that come in, and as such, that could flex from 3 to 400 million or whatever, but we're working on implementing whatever we can in rapid transit planning for that within the 3.55, not at the expense of the others.
Thank you.
Okay, Mayor Belinkie.
Just a really quick clarification. I'm stunned a little bit by the idea that the staying within the budget but requiring an extra $1.6 billion in delta for the switch of technology wouldn't impact the potential of service provision to other areas of the region. To pretend that there wouldn't be a benefit if we could secure any additional funds that could be allocated towards the rest of the region, and rather continue to invest them only into the change in technology. To pretend that that wouldn't impact the rest of the region, I think is unbelievable. If we can secure those extra funds, they can be invested into the rest of the region. if we were presented with a SkyTrain at 3.55 or otherwise, but with a 1.6 delta from the primary technology that was proposed, that remaining 1.6 billion, we could literally have funding 5 different projects for other areas of the region. And as a region, if we sat there and said, here's the SkyTrain total solution, and here's the initial approved solution with a little bit less, there's no question, there's a little bit less value in that technology to the owner of the technology, the municipality. But here are the other 5 areas of the region that get that other delta of capital to invest in. What's better for the region? I just want to make sure people understand, like, there is going to be another impact to the rest of the region if we can't secure those extra funds, or if they're all allocated towards the switch of technology. There's no way that it doesn't.
So speaking to the amendment that we're dealing with here, and this is my interpretation and understanding, and based on the comments from Translink staff, is first of all, this does limit in phase 2 to the 1.6 billion, whatever that is able to achieve in terms of this project. In terms of phase 3, it also does limit it to the $3.5 billion. I think the report is very clear that switching to SkyTrain technology along the Fraser corridor does have a very big impact in terms of what options would be available to service the King George and 104th corridor to Guildford there, and this funding envelope is going to have this body make those changes. I think anything beyond the $3.5 billion, as has been mentioned before, brings us back into that Transport 2050 discussion, and projects have to be evaluated amongst all the other regional demands, and that will be a discussion for future time. So I am going to call the question on the amendment because I don't think we need to belabor it too much more, and I don't think either way it actually makes a significant difference on the intent of the original motion or how staff will interpret that. So with that, I did apologize. Mayor Richard Stewart.
My apologies, and it was a question to clarify because of comments made. The last line of the amendment, to complete the 10-year vision to ensure that the Surrey-Langley SkyTrain is constructed within 3.55. Is that the right number there? Because that leaves nothing for the other.
Yeah, I think you're correct. That should be. My intent was to, everything, but that's 3.12 or yeah. So maybe that. Like, I was wondering about that too after I said it, because that's specific to that line, whereas the other is specific to the South of Fraser projects.
Yeah,
so
and
that's a good point.
But on Mayor Belenki's point, though. We've had discussions with the federal government in the middle of an election campaign about, what about our project? And their answer quite often is, didn't you get the check we sent you for the North Shore sewage treatment plant? Because it is one of those realities that we are one of the unique places in Canada where we're 22 separate communities in a metropolitan area all trying to work. And when the federal government gets asked to fund something in Metro Vancouver, they think they're funding something in Metro Vancouver and not just something in Surrey, and therefore the funding isn't necessarily available somewhere else in the region. I'm not complaining about the North Shore plant. I'm using it as a wonderful example of collaboration among the region.
That wasn't moved and seconded. So,
Mayor Frost.
The last piece of the 3.55 seems to be causing more angst than I was trying to reduce. It wasn't moved and seconded as amendment to the amendment, so I'm happy to just take that right out. And then we still are working. It's still mentioned in other parts of this motion, the 3.55. But if that makes the body feel better.
I think we are overcomplicating this discussion. I actually think having it in there provides a bit more clarity to the intent of what we're trying to do to differentiate between phase 1 or phase 2 and phase 3 there. And I think we're ultimately discussions about phase 3. There are going to be many more discussions around this table. Phase 3 is not funded. So I think we have hashed this amendment, particularly given that it actually doesn't have a significant impact if the original motion is passed one way or the other. So with that, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Okay. It looks like the amendment has been defeated. Okay, we are back to the original motion, part of the recommendation. I will now open the floor to discussion. Okay, Mayor Froese.
Thank you very much. So now to the main motion. First of all, I want to thank staff for all the work they've done. Initially, back in December, this body made a decision, that I really wanted to see the business case. I was not sold on switching the technologies. I know there's good points on both LRT. Surrey has some, at that time, prior to the election, had some very good reasons for LRT, which we supported. As Langley's, both Langley's and old staff's point of view, SkyTrain along Fraser Highway was ranked slightly higher than LRT, but nevertheless, we as a body at that time went along with it, and the south of Langley, or south of Fraser mayors went along with it. The technology was asked to be changed by the mayor of Surrey. This body said yes, but we want to see a business case, and I wanted to see a business case, and I'm happy that the business case shows that SkyTrain along Fraser Highway is the better technology. Not saying that there isn't good. There's a lot of good points, and I heard from the Surrey Board of Trade, they make some very good arguments. Those are good points for Surrey. I want to talk a little bit about, I hate to give history lessons, but the whole process that we've been going through. And I mentioned earlier that Langley has been waiting for some really significant transportation in the Translink network to move our people back and forth through the region. I can tell you a story about, I used to work for the City of Vancouver. I worked for the City of Vancouver for 19 years, started in 1985, just as Expo Line came on board. I used to drive to the Scott Road Station and get on the train and get to work that way. And then it moved out, as another piece of it moved out to King George, and I'd drive to that station and get on and get to downtown Vancouver and back again. Port Mann Bridge was not really a good option at the time, and that was a better option for me. Now we're looking to move it further. It looks like we can't do it, and it's no surprise to me that $1.6 billion isn't going to take it all the way to Langley. I kind of guessed that in the beginning. It was pretty clear. In the beginning, it was $2.9 billion is what we were talking about to get SkyTrain all the way to Langley, and now with the change in time since, 2014 or so, it's increased to 3.1, and we know that more delays does nothing but increase it. Coming to Fleetwood is another piece of that. It went to Scott Road, it went to King George. Getting into Fleetwood is another piece of the puzzle. And if we stop putting the puzzle together, we're going to get nothing. If we said in the beginning, we weren't here, it was a provincial project way back when, for Expo Line, if we wanted to do the Evergreen Line, the Millennium Line, the Expo Line, the Canada Line all at once, it wouldn't have happened. It has to happen in pieces. We can't afford to put the whole thing in all at once, and I think we're all well aware of it. So I don't want to just say this is a Langley thing. This is a regional thing. There are people in Langley that travel to Vancouver to work in other parts. There's people in Vancouver and Coquitlam and Burnaby that travel to Langley to work. We know there's two ways. We're seeing a lot of folks come out from other parts of the region, buying new homes in Langley, and still want to maintain their job. And I'm going to pick on Vancouver. It could be North Vancouver. It could be anywhere, but say Vancouver. But they're finding that the housing costs are getting high, and they need to find other ways to raise their family in a home that they can afford. And they're coming out to places like Langley and Maple Ridge and other areas. And we need to have an efficient transportation system that will move them. The Fraser Highway line along the SkyTrain line along Fraser Highway is a spine in the system. We need the bus network to connect to that spine, and I think that speaks to why Translink is the #1 transit authority in North America. We just heard yesterday, is because not only do they just focus on the shiny object of a train, they made sure the whole system worked. There's buses, there's the major road network, there's the sea buses, and goes on and on and on. This system is a complete system. This is one piece of it that really benefits the entire region, not just Langley, not just Surrey, but it benefits. Was at the Downtown Vancouver Board Business Improvement Association breakfast yesterday, and they mentioned how many jobs. Not only are we talking about the population increasing in south of Fraser and throughout the region the next 15 to 30 years, of probably 500,000 people coming into that area, but the job increase in downtown Vancouver is set to increase substantially too, and those workers have to get there and get home again efficiently. And we don't want to bog down our economy by clogging our roads with cars. We've got to get our goods through and freight through, but also get our people through. So I'm hopeful that as Langley has supported all of the other projects through the years, the Evergreen project, we had, the previous mayor to me had to have that vote to increase the gas tax 2 cents a liter. Not very popular in Langley, but it's a regional system, and it was the right decision to make. But I haven't ridden to Coquitlam on the Evergreen line yet, but it doesn't help me, but it helps our region, helps others that need it. And it's important for the region. We've supported all the other projects out in the Langleys because it's a regional system. And I would really hope that the mayors would support this because it doesn't just affect Langley and Surrey. It affects the region and moving people and goods throughout the region. So there's my plea, and I'd ask for your support on this and put your regional hats on. And we'll continue to support, as Mayor McCallum said, all of the projects throughout the region as we have in the past. And that won't stop because I look at this as helping everyone in this room and all of our residents to have a more livable region so we can get around and give people choices. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Hurley?
Yeah, just a question for staff around this. I didn't see anything in the report about, you know, what's needed to support a transit system like this when we put this kind of investment, and that is the density that's required to support that. And I didn't see that anywhere in this report, so I was wondering, has there been discussion with the cities involved about the density that may be required to support this system? Because it's not always a popular thing, as we've seen in other areas. So I just see that maybe a piece that's been missing here.
That's a good question, Mayor Hurley. So per the direction of the Mayor's Council, for every major project, we start to develop partnership agreements that identify the actions that each host municipality and Translink will undertake to make sure that the assumptions in the business case are more as certain as possible. So the business case that you see, or the business case inputs, it's not complete yet. The forecasting is based on the projected densities and growth per the regional growth strategy consistent with the OCPs of each of the communities right now. We have been, and there's obviously uncertainty over time, we have started the discussions with all three host municipalities, and the MOU that was attached to one report speaks to some of the planning activities already underway in the city of Surrey around the centers and stations to try and ensure that we get the density or better, even to maximize the outcomes accordingly. Langley City is also updating their city plan and looking to improve the density, et cetera, that would improve the outcomes of this, and we've been talking to the township. The next stage for this, if you approve it, will be the submission of the business case that will include MOUs with all three of the municipalities. And prior to the approval by this body, you will see listed the actions that they're undertaking to try and ensure the targets for both employment and density and population that are projected that support the business case.
So, and then would part of that discussion be around land lift values and how that may be put towards the, some of that may be put towards the construction of projects of this size, because we have to start and find ways to fund these projects. We just can't keep throwing money out there without new ideas for funding, because, you know, there's no guarantee that this funding is going to come from the senior levels of government, and we really need to start having serious discussions about proper levels of funding.
We are exploring with through the Joint Finance Committee and then to the Mayor's Council all the options for funding Phase 3 and beyond, including then the long-range strategy, land value capture, and other mechanisms are part of that analysis that we'll be bringing forward to you and looking at what the trade-offs are associated are, but what the potential is as well.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Brody.
I've already commented on it, so I won't belabor it, but what I would like to do now is propose what I think is a pretty straightforward amendment based on the fact that we have to have the Translink CEO sign that MOU with Surrey. So I would suggest as, we just add a clause to this that the Mayor's Council endorses the memorandum of understanding attached as Appendix 1 to the report, which is 3.1 Annex A, and authorize execution by the Translink CEO.
Okay, is there a seconder to that amendment? It's been seconded. Does anyone want to discuss the amendment? If not, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. The amendment is now part of the original motion. Mayor Bodie, do you have anything further on the? Okay.
No, thank you.
Mayor Dingwall.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just hearkening back to one of my original comments, I'd make a request, or if necessary, a motion, just to pull 2B for a separate vote on 2B.
So I will have those separated.
Okay. And I do have one comment on the main motion. And I agree with Mayor Froese that the south of the Fraser is a major spine in the Metro Vancouver area. But I would say that this one has an odd-looking geographical back. And there are at least two main spines, east to west, which goes from the North Shore on out through the northeast sector. And so, again, every opportunity I get is that we are a very large metro area divided by a river. And there are needs on both sides of that river. So there, in my view, likely two major spines and then a number going north and south. But in any event, I wanted to make that comment.
Thank you. Mayor McCallum.
Thank you very much. I just want to make a just very quick comment, and I fully support it, the motion that's before you. Part of the comments is that we have done, at least in the city of Surrey, a lot of work, and we're currently, I want to speak just for a minute on density. There is a big change in Surrey out of the election, and part of what the people of Surrey want is to have a lot more density along the transit corridors, bus corridors and SkyTrain along Fraser Highway. It's a huge change in Surrey, but we certainly the last 6 months have seen that already develop in Surrey. And so to answer a question that was brought forward earlier, we are seeing and we are doing and we are approving a lot higher, or any growth in Surrey. We're encouraging it, and it's actually coming forward with a lot of development already to concentrate that development along the transit corridors, which includes our bus corridors also. And we also have, working with Translink, working fairly quickly on a land use plan right along Fraser Highway to support the SkyTrain. I also want to mention on public consulting on this particular line along Fraser Highway. Translink did a very extensive consulting process along that with the people of Surrey and people of the region. The results of that survey we've all seen, but to have figures up in the 80s in support of this, and actually to have larger support in the region for this project than in even Surrey by 1 percentage point, is astonishing even to me looking back, because what it tells me is the region recognizes as a region where the growth is and where transit needs to be put. And I think that's a really positive sign down the road. In fact, I think our residents are out in front of us sometimes, recognizing that we need to service all of our communities with transportation. So I think they actually are sending us a message that we need to work together so that all cities and communities in our region get the services, especially in transportation, that they need. So I think that's a good, very good sign. And I would hope that this body recognizes that, and when we vote on this, that we get as close to unanimous on it, because it will also send a message to our residents that we're working for all of them in our region. And the third and final point I just want to mention is looking at some of the figures on the cost-benefit basis in comparison to previous lines that certainly I was involved with in the region. these figures are the best at this stage of any project that we've seen in this region. The ridership strong, or projected ridership strong. I will say, because I do know the developments that are coming along, at least the current ones, that ridership figures you see up there at the end of, let's say, 5 years till it takes to build, those ridership numbers will be a lot higher than is projected even now. But the one on the cost-benefit figures, to me, when we look at a business case and when we look at financing these lines, are very, very good for this line. And so I think with the huge public support, the ridership figure's good, the cost-benefit's good, I think that this project needs to go ahead as quick as possible. So I will be certainly supporting it as it is.
Thank you. Mayor Vandenbroek?
Great, thank you. I share the same sentiments as Mayor Froese and Mayor McCallum. We came to you last year and said we wanted SkyTrain instead of LRT because that's what we had heard at our campaigning. Translink went out and did a survey and proved it without a doubt that that's what people south of the Fraser wanted with SkyTrain. If we went with LRT, people would have to get off the system in Surrey, switch to another system, which would make their commute even longer. What we want to do is we want to get people off the road, we want to cure the congestion, and I believe by using the SkyTrain technology, we can do this, and we can nail transportation issues, affordable housing issues, and climate action issues. You know, we've had 2 committees go through all of this, and it looks good to them, and they've approved it. The staff report was clear. You know, like I said before, the Translink survey proved it, that the SLS line is a good project and it's wanted. We are part of the region, and having this line through Surrey to Langley will address regional issues, and not just in our area, but everybody else's area, just like any other SkyTrain extension has, the Expo or whatever else. So I think what we need to do is have a united front here and keep to the 10-year vision that we've all had and keep moving forward and really put the onus on other levels of government to provide us the funding to the Cure Congestion campaign. We're a fast-growing region. You know, Surrey's population is going to outnumber Vancouver's probably within a year. I believe they're getting, over 1,000 new people a month to Surrey. We're also servicing, whether we like it or not, or whether they're part of Translink region or not, we're also servicing Abbotsford, Chilliwack, and Hope. And if anybody watches the morning news, we all know it bottlenecks on that highway every day, every morning, going both ways. And building new lanes, yeah, that's great, but that's never going to cure the congestion. And we're going to end up being like an LA where we have 6 lanes on our highways and nobody going anywhere. So we need to get those cars off the road, and the way to do that is run this extension of SkyTrain. It makes sense. It will provide people with more time with their families, less time commuting, and it provides a healthier community for everybody. So I'd really love to see everybody support this. So thank you for listening.
Thank you. Mayor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Chair Cote. Again, for Mr. Cross, to confirm, which I think you told Mayor Brody, that the difference between SkyTrain and the alternate source is 22 minutes versus 30 minutes?
It's in the low 30s. Yeah, I don't have that right in front of me. So it is around 10 minutes. I did not point out at the time the ridership difference, mainly because of the travel time, is fairly significant. We're saying LRT would have been roughly 50 to 60% less than the SkyTrain.
Less ridership
Yes,
because,
because of the travel time and convenience and speed.
so for 10 minutes, 40% of people fall away.
Yes, it's a very significant change. And to my response to Mayor Little about trip times, a lot of that can be a very significant reduction in the overall trip. Not everybody's even going that full length. In fact, most are not. They're going to segments of that. And so that changes both the overall planning of their trip, and so it reduces their cost accordingly as well.
Thank you very much. To the chair, and I guess this is some of the messaging as I understand it. We got to this point because of a weighted vote a few months ago where 4 mayors voted for SkyTrain, and here we are today. Can you tell me, in your view, Mr. Chair, if this motion does not pass, this recommendation, where does that put us?
Well, I think it definitely does put a pause. This is a major checkpoint with the mayor's council regarding the business case and a major update point. So I think it would be very difficult taking the next steps to January 2020 and getting the final business case on this project. Exactly what it leads to, it probably means a real slowdown and a pause on this as this group has to then figure out what the next steps are. Mayor Little.
Thank you, Chair Cote. I think most of my comments from the earlier item still stand. We're the point of the regional growth strategy was to try to allow the beneficial economic situation where the jobs move to where the people are, rather than our transit approach, which is to try and move people to where the jobs are. That's when you get the efficiency. This is further addressing the issue of sprawl, and I look at Vancouver's plans of the currently being constructed through to their planned improvements to office and retail space. They have over 8 million square feet of office and retail space coming to the Vancouver downtown peninsula area, and that's very high intensity employment that's not going to be accommodated by the population increases in that area, which means they're going to be drawing from further and further and further afield. And I hear people around the table say, well, people just need to get to work. People, the housing costs are a little bit lower, so they travel a little bit farther, and you think you're going to get more time with your family with this, but what's probably going to happen is the prices near the stations are going to go through the roof, and you're going to have to go even further afield to be able to find that kind of affordable housing. This is not solving the problem. This is not letting the economic situation change so that Surrey can become the regional economic center that we all need it to be, so that Langley can become the economic center we need it to be. This is actually going to work against that, because it's going to make it so that those areas become bedroom communities for Vancouver, because it'll be so efficient to be able to get downtown, and since Vancouver is building so much office space, it'll make it so that why would you be setting up your office in Surrey when you can just hop on the SkyTrain, get downtown, and the prices are competitive. So I still, again, see this as limiting Surrey's ability to become the regional center that we need it to be, and so I'm not going to be supportive of it.
Thank you. Councillor Lady.
Actually, my question's been answered.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Buchanan.
Thank you very much. Well, I certainly support parts of this, and certainly support the 3 mayors who, from Surrey and the 2 Langleys, who want to see this moving forward. And I think we made a commitment back, well, there was a vote, and it went in a direction that not necessarily we wanted to see. But I think the message was very clear back then, was that we had an envelope. We had a commitment that we'd said it would be at 1.6 for this phase. We have an envelope that we reaffirmed, I believe in January, of $3.55 billion. And I don't see us altering from that. This isn't necessarily what the original plan was, but at the end of the day, this is what the South of the Frasers want. Mayor McCallum, I know that you campaigned on this and that this is the direction you want to go, and the reality for us, and I completely appreciate the frustration of the Surrey Board of Trade and spending a significant amount of time in terms of looking at a technology that has been planned for multiple years. But the reality is we can't force municipalities to do what they don't want to do. We need that political leadership at those councils to even support us throughout the region. And so I do believe that, you know, I personally believe we need to stick to the 1.63. Number 5 is incredibly important for this section, and that we look to keeping to the 3.55, but I will support Mayor Dingwall's separation of A and B, because at this point, I think, to Mayor McCallum's point, and I will take you for your word, Mayor McCallum, that we do actually need to be working as an entire region, and we need to be looking at making sure that we are not putting ourselves in a position where we are then fighting for, if we go with B and go beyond the 3.55, that other parts of the region will not be served. And I come from a part of the region that's just as congested as anyone else, if not more so. It is a constant bottleneck to get on or through the North Shore, particularly if you're coming from further afield. I also am the mayor of the city that is a regional town center that is not served by rapid transit. And part of it is that, you know, we don't have the density. And so it often is, you know, if we tie it solely to density without looking at why people are traveling through or why they can't live in my community because there isn't enough density, you know, I don't buy the argument that it is actually contributing to the sprawl in other areas. It is in the fact if we can actually build more housing for the people who live in our community, who work in our communities, who can live in our communities, it would be helpful. But the reality is it's not there, it's not coming fast enough, and they are moving further away. So we need to provide them alternative ways in which to move throughout the region. And I think getting this first phase done to Fleetwood makes sense. And then when we get to the next phase, that we all need to be sitting at the table and rolling up our sleeves and making a significant commitment of how we get to those further afield parts of the region, then we can look at that next section and see where it fits within the rest of all of our wants and needs for the people within our community. There's multiple projects going on. There's the Massey, George Massey Bridge. We've got upgrades to highways. We've got tunnels, sorry. Whatever it ends up being. There's multiple transportation projects.
Well, let's not mix that into this discussion. It's already complicated enough.
There's multiple transportation projects going on. At the end of the day, we have to provide people with choices. We have a system that is, the demand is higher than the service that we currently have. Failing this at this point puts this all in a flux, and I am not looking at having a failed motion that then makes us get back to the drawing board. It will further delay us expanding the public transportation system. It will not be good for the residents of Metro Vancouver. And I think we continue our push for the Cure Congestion campaign and make sure that we get the dedicated, predictable funding that we need on an annual basis to actually get this region moving. So I will support what's here and with a clause of the B being voted on separate, and absolutely would agree with Mayor McCallum that this is the point in time where we absolutely need to show the message that we are working together. We will take the word that we need to stick to the envelope and support the broader region collectively. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Richard Stewart.
Thank you. And as one of the strongest advocates for public transportation in the last decade in this region, and one of the strongest advocates for the regional growth strategy, I just want to express that this isn't the way you do it. And so Mayor Little again made reference to the regional growth strategy. The regional growth strategy, and others have talked about where do you put the density and how does this match. So we had gone down a long path in Coquitlam, I hate to bring it back to that, but where we wanted LRT and we had designed our community around that because LRT gets more frequent stops, and therefore you can put density in a different kind of framework. The density around a SkyTrain station is that 400-meter circle that is high density, and then around that is another 400 meters radius that's medium and lower density. Stations are every couple of kilometers, as they are on this line, every 2 kilometers. So you end up with actually less land that is capable of supporting the higher density housing, but some of the land gets a real big increase in value because it's right near a station, and therefore stations support high-rise. We haven't seen at the regional growth strategy yet the kind of changes that envisions, and we kept saying in the last couple of years, how do we get the rigor related to our planning for transportation so that transportation planning and regional growth planning go hand in hand, and we ensure that the density arrives at the stations. The Coquitlam line was one of the first lines built with the density already there by the time the line was opened. And that wasn't because of clear thinking and visionary thinking. It was because it took 25 years to get it built. And we'd already started to build the density. But we have to make sure that as we continue to expand rail transportation and other the expensive investments in capital investments in transit, that the density is not, if not in place already, at least in the plan already in the area where the stations will be. Here we're going to have a 2-kilometer gap, so the 400-meter radius will then have, theoretically, I guess, a kilometer of non-density, and then a kilometer of density and a kilometer of non-density along the line. The way we ought to be advancing these projects is the way the previous plan that this would replace was advanced by Surrey, which was, here's what we want to do with our land use, here's what we want to do with our transportation, put them together, let's get a capital plan, let's work it out through Translink, let's find the best technology, let's advance this thing as a plan, let's work with the Board of Trade, and all those sorts of things that have to happen. And I lament that we're making this change, not because Surrey shouldn't have the right to self-determination and that Langley shouldn't have that right as well, but because there are processes that make it better public policy if you do them in the right order and in the right way. And we also don't end up with that question related to what happens if we don't advance past, say, 184, or what happens if the region's priorities change and we never make it to Langley, and what happens if the costs exceed the 3.55 and we have a motion saying no, the costs won't, because I think they will. So ultimately, I supported tooth and nail every single step along the previous plan, because that was the plan that Surrey advanced. It was the plan that was consistent with the regional growth strategy and the regional context statements that Surrey advanced. I just worry now that we end up with no rail transportation along the L route, where the businesses would really thrive using LRT technology. And I know Mayor McCallum said earlier, don't speak for Surrey, and I'm not trying to speak for Surrey. I want us to make these decisions regionally. And when one of us comes and says, no, that's not what we need, it becomes a real spanner in the works. We're not thinking regionally. We start breaking down, and I really hope we can get past these kinds of barriers and think, as Mayor Buchanan said, think regionally and advance a regional transportation plan that makes sense, and it can't always be SkyTrain.
Thank you, Mayor Booth.
Thank you. So, as many of you know, I'm here as Councillor Cameron's designate. I'm the mayor of West Vancouver, but I actually was born in Surrey Memorial. I attended Fleetwood Elementary School. I attended Port Kells Elementary School. So I'm very familiar living on a 15-acre hobby farm on 192nd Street for up till I went to high school. So I'm very familiar with the area, and when this was proposed, and I've only been to the November meeting where the weighted vote was called around this issue, and I've been percolating on it since then. I go to the Metro meetings instead. When it was first proposed, I really just could not see it. I had this vision in the flats, the Serpentine Flats, of cows munching on grass and the SkyTrain going through there, because this is part of the ALR, and it really seemed inconsistent to me. I've also heard from the business community around the benefits of the light rail over the SkyTrain. I think there's a lot of validity to those comments around community building, around establishing business centers, and many of the comments that have been mentioned around developing a regional town center and what light rail would do versus the SkyTrain. However, I respect Mr. McCallum's, Mayor McCallum's legitimacy around representing what his residents want. I also appreciate the business analysis that's been done by Translink staff, and so I will support this, but I guess I want to highlight a couple things that do cause me concern. The first meeting that I attended, I was quite disappointed when the weighted vote was called. Mayor McCallum, you're now saying that we need to work together for all parts of the region, and we need to be seen to working together. This, I think, SkyTrain proposal, ultimately, from a regional perspective and from West Vancouver's perspective, could be quite beneficial. Many of our employees are coming from Surrey. Unfortunately, no one can afford to live in West Vancouver, so 78% of our employees are coming from elsewhere. And I know of police officers that live in the Cloverdale area that come to West Van. So there are benefits to West Vancouver and the rest of the region, but I really want to highlight that I've seen examples where this regional thinking is not occurring, and I'm going to take you on your word that you are going to be moving forward and thinking about the region, both in terms of transit and this table, but also at the Metro table. I'm supporting this. I'm respecting your representation of your community, and I'm also really taking you at your word that you're going to be thinking of the region in going forward here, and the table that I most often see you at, which is at the Metro table. So thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Mayor Booth. Mayor West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. A number of good comments have been made by colleagues. I find Mayor Little's comments echoing a lot of my thoughts around on the issue. But I certainly respect the position that the mayors that would be served by the Surrey Langley SkyTrain have taken. And at the end of the day, I take a very, I guess, practical view to this issue. And I don't think we should delude ourselves of what the outcome would be. If we turn this down, at the next meeting, it will come back. Mayor Candy Stewart will be here. There will be a weighted vote like there was before, and it will be back on track. So to me, there's really no point. It would just be an unnecessary delay because, I mean, ultimately the decision was made in the previous meeting. It may not have been the decision that some of us wanted, but it is the decision that has been made. And I just see very little to be gained at this point by playing games and turning it down only to have it come back when the composition of the Mayor's Council is different and the voting outcome, you know, would go accordingly. So I will be supporting the recommendation. And I do look forward to hearing from my friend in Pitt Meadows about 2B. Thank you.
Thank you. Director McClutchan.
So I came to the table late on all of this, and so just sort of listening around the table, I definitely am hearing this 3.5 million envelope as being important for the rest of the region to be able to support their agendas. I'm also interested in hearing from some of the residents that live in Surrey that are sort of worried about what this line will do. Unlike Mayor Booth, I don't know Surrey very well, but looking at this map, one of my concerns is just seeing this one line and thinking about, well, what about the rest of Surrey? And I maybe bring that as a question. I don't know if you can put that back up. Back to my concern before, if we assume that we keep an envelope of 3.55 million on this project, or billion, sorry, and respect that Surrey wants SkyTrain to be coming out here, and Mayor Froese is saying, you know, this has been a step-by-step process all along. Would it make sense to, I also, on the flip side, I'll just say for a second that I hear that any of the delays that we put into this come at a cost of, I think you said 60 million a year, so that's not insignificant. But does Translink, do the minds that get that are looking at the data behind this, do you feel with that first piece that you have the information to say that we are going to get the right balance of types of public transportation across Surrey and into Langley? Or would it make sense to ask you to be looking at other options? For example, if we went with the 1.6 going to Fleetwood, and then looked at other options for the whole of that south of Surrey region, well, I guess not the whole region, but at least Surrey and Langley, and asked you to look at other options that, you know, maybe made it more comprehensive with the rest of about $1.5 billion left. I don't know if that's complicating things, and I certainly don't want to do that, but I guess I put it maybe as a question.
Maybe staff can just comment on that.
Yeah, Director McCutchan, maybe on the former part of that, and maybe I didn't emphasize it enough, that if we stick within the $3.5 billion and assume that we're allocating the first $3.1 billion to the SkyTrain on Fraser Highway, what can we do with that remaining roughly $400 million? We can do a lot. And what we're seeing on those corridors, we haven't finished all this analysis, that if we were to do bus rapid transit, probably most likely on King George Boulevard, and we haven't got into the details yet, we would see a significant, being able to serve a significant proportion of the transit ridership that we would have seen with LRT, or even that we would have seen with SkyTrain on that corridor. So you can accomplish a lot of the objectives that were laid out. LRT and bus rapid transit were the final shortlisted technologies for both King George and 104. So that is not inconsistent from what we had initially looked at. So you can be achieving both the city and the regional objectives with a smaller scale envelope.
And Mr. Cross, I wonder if you could also just, a lot of what Mayor Little has spoken about also resonates with me, and I wonder if there are ways that we could, you know, in that 400 million, that we can be building out more of a network in Surrey so as to promote the growth.
And that's a fair question, and I probably did a disservice on that. So part of the refresh includes like looking at going all the way to White Rock and South Surrey, which was part of the initial scope of the rapid transit study back in 2010. Anyway, so we have already identified a B-line extension in phase 3 towards that. There are additional B-line, I haven't changed my vernacular, rapid bus corridors in phase 3, including connecting up to Pitt Meadows and through Langley Township, that would better connect into the full rapid transit system, both this SkyTrain along Fraser Highway, and a lot of the ridership is not just generated by the people that live around it. In this particular case, like the examples that were brought up, people are accessing it from bus services from around a very large catchment area. So those are important connections. So we will be both looking at what the plans are now and updating those bus integration and higher capacity bus plans.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Vandenbroek.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that Langley City is currently redoing our entire OCP and our zoning bylaws to comply with SkyTrain coming through and to provide affordable housing around the area. I'd really, really hate to see this board become the next Toronto and throw all our hard work out the door. And to Mayor Little's comments about not getting rid of the congestion and we're just going to be causing more, just so you know, not all the business want to go into Vancouver. They actually do want to go into Surrey. And that's why we need this line, is to get people to and from work. And quite realistically, people can't afford anything. We have in north of the Fraser. And you know what? Surrey's the new Vancouver, Township's the new Burnaby, and we're the new West. That's the reality of it, and that's why we need it.
So, the original New West is getting pretty old. So I appreciate.
Amalgamate planning with New West.
So appreciate all the comments that have been made today. I think we have spent a significant amount of time discussing this, but I think that is time well spent. This is a pretty big decision. This is a pretty significant project in the region, and I think it's important to have the type of dialogue that we have. Stepping back from this individual decision, I think Metro Vancouver is a success story, not only in Canada, but in North America when it comes to transit. We've seen record transit growth all across our region. We've seen record transit growth south of the Fraser River, and this is due to a number of factors, but mainly because we've been able to actually invest in transit infrastructure, and we're only just getting started. To me, I think this is a huge success story. I think this really goes back to years, and we've had our difficult issues over the years when it comes to transit projects. I don't think there has been a rapid transit project that hasn't gone through a difficult point of view, but we have been able to, as a collective region, be able to work our way through those difficult things, and I want to see us to be able to do the same with this particular project. No doubt, I like many other folks around this table, have struggled with this change of direction. I was on the previous Mayor's Council and was fully supportive of the plan that had been outlined there. And I still believe that the previous plan would have had a lot of benefits south of the Fraser River and in Surrey. But to me, I think given some of the change in direction and change in leadership south of the Fraser River, and given that it was a very open and publicly discussed topic in the election south of the Fraser River, I think we as a region needed to be open to having discussion and digging deep into that. And to me, the crux of this discussion really comes down to, is this new plan, this new alternative, still a good transit project? And I think the work that Translink has done over the past number of months has demonstrated that the revised plan, although different, and there's pros and cons between the two different visions and how they will shape south of the Fraser, that this new revised approach is actually a very good transit project. It actually drives more transit ridership to our system. It's got a strong business cases that are comparable to the Evergreen and Canada line, and I think puts us in a solid footing. And to me, that was the main thing that I was looking forward to really convince me whether we should be making such a significant change from the original plan. So I recognize this is a difficult decision and a difficult and certainly will, although not the final decision, this is definitely, if approved, would be steering us further down to this direction to final approval in January 2020. But this approval does point us in this direction and does give direction to Translink staff to continue down this road. So, in terms of voting on the motion that's above here, there has been some discussion about wanting to look at item 2 separately. So I'm going to start by voting for calling the question on items 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 all together, and we will come back to 2 afterwards. So I am going to call the question on those first 6 items, and we will return to item number 2. So with that, all those in favor of those items, in favor? Opposed? Okay, it carries. And moving to item number 2, we are going to separate them for item 2A. All those in favor? Opposed? It carries. And for item 2B, all those in favor? Opposed? That motion is defeated. Okay, that completes our discussion on this item. Now, the timing on our schedule has been a little bit warped, so I'm just going to have a quick chat with Mike in terms of what needs to be done today and what might not. So just give me one moment. And I know we've gone a little bit over time regarding that discussion. Most of the items, sorry, if I can get the attention of the body here. Most of the items are for information, so I'm actually going to defer those to our next Mayor's Council meeting, with the exception of the Burnaby Mountain Gondola, which does have a specific recommendation in terms of taking the next steps. I'm hoping staff can do a short presentation on that item and for the body to...
So, Chair, yes, we can do a very short presentation. With me is Matt Craig, Senior Manager of System Plans, who's helped lead this project. You see a recommendation in the report to move forward to the next stage of project development on this, which would be public consultation. We're looking for endorsement on that. Just a couple of quick slides as orientation on this. There have been questions about why this has come forward, and one of the key things to understand is both we're having a challenge serving existing demand with buses between Production Way and Simon Fraser, and as you heard from some of the delegates, that's only forecast to increase, and we do not anticipate that we would be able to serve all of that demand with a bus-based technology, partly in light of, as you can see, what the route is that a bus has to take. It's roughly 15 minutes. We're already running every 1 to 2 minutes during peak time. So this is a high transit corridor, and we started looking at options and alternatives. With that in mind, we started this work back in 2011, and then did a refresh of this in 2017 and 2018. We have looked at both ground-based alternatives and gondola tram systems around the world to kind of understand what the options are. Gondolas are not suitable in a lot of different contexts, but in this particular one where you are having to cross very difficult topography, whether it be, you can see some options of mountains or ravines, or in some cases bodies of water. They can be much more direct, and they can offer a medium-high capacity. And that applies to this particular context. We have looked at a bunch of different options. The most direct of those, which is sort of the red line, red and green lines, cut the travel time by buses right now from 15 minutes to roughly 6 minutes using a gondola. And while that differs for some of the other alignments, the general principle is true. We're able to reduce the travel time, increase ridership, and actually have higher capacity. At the same time, a gondola shows promise because the operating costs are relatively efficient compared to running buses up and down. So we're able to have lower operating costs than even currently, or roughly about the same, and be able to serve future demand through 2050 without increases in bus service. So we see very substantial operational savings that make this attractive in that regard. It's also highly reliable. We know, and you heard, that we have a number of days a year with snow events and other events where we're not able to serve that, and it adds some resiliency to the model. So if you endorse our work program, the next steps would be to make sure that we have a project that is supported by the local municipality, in this case City of Burnaby, who asked us to look at one of the other alternatives that was shown on the previous map, to go out and show the community around Burnaby Mountain the work that's been done, the options, and see where they are at and where their concerns are, and then be able to report back to you on what the findings of that are, what the level of support for the project is, technically what the benefits are, and during this time also speak to senior governments about where their priorities are so we understand how that may fit. We had previously identified this through the Mayor's Council and Board as a priority for Green Infrastructure Fund, which is a different category of federal funding, so would not be in competition for other investments that were in the Phase 3 investment plan. So our priority for that has been this project as well as the low carbon fleet strategy, as they have very significant reductions in greenhouse gas. So I'll leave it at that, Chair.
Okay, well, I'll open it up if there's any comments or questions. Mayor Hurley?
Yeah, thanks staff for bringing this forward. At Burnaby City Council, we are comfortable moving forward to the next stage, providing there is real thorough community consultation. We have put forward another option, possible option for our route going up, so we would like all three options to be fully explored throughout the public consultation process. But thank you for bringing it forward, and from Burnaby City Council, we're comfortable where it's at and hope that everyone around the table supports the recommendation.
Okay, Mayor Vanderbroek?
Thank you for your presentation. I absolutely support this idea. I think it's a fantastic idea. That's it. No other comments, but I think it's a great idea because we need alternate plans besides SkyTrain and buses and such. So,
thank you, Mayor Dingwall.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of questions and then likely a comment afterwards. But one is about what's anticipated potentially to be the dollar cost, irregardless of funding opportunities, but the overall kind of the anticipated dollar cost. And the second one is, where does this fit within the Phase 3 or the 2050 vision? So two of those, and then I'll have a comment.
The most recent cost estimates, Mayor Dingwall, for the most direct alignment was $197 million, which we would be pursuing federal and provincial funding on the order of roughly 80%, and as well as partner funding from SFU and potentially municipalities in the form of land or in kind to be able to offset that. As I mentioned, the operating piece is important too. There are small operational savings today, and then vis-a-vis what our plans are for expansion, those increase to several million a year that can help finance a small portion of that from the region's sake. Where it sits in the Mayor's vision and the Mayor's plan, there was money in the Phase 2 plan to do this work. To do both the consultation and technical work to bring it forward for a business case, and that it could advance if it had support from senior governments and partners that was not in competition for the other priorities in Phase 3. Otherwise, it would go into the hopper with all the other projects for Transport 2050.
Great, thank you. And in particular, I think the last comment for me is important. And as we just went through the previous discussion, particularly with 2B, The worry, I think, for me is around scope, but more importantly, more worrisome is priority creep. And again, we're trying to look at the whole region and figure out where we need to go. And again, planning ultimately and quite often leads to inevitability and being self-fulfilling. And so I'm glad to hear a couple things. One is that funding was available in phase 2. That's important for me. The second one, and this is into that broader discussion around land value capture and being able to self-fund some of these projects and investment. And if it's 80% funding through other levels of government and then looking at partners, I think that's really important, especially for something like this, because at the end of the day, I hearken back to the 2 spines, and hopefully that ends up seeing the priority that it needs, both for the North Shore and the Northeast sector. So again, anything like this pulls away from the 2 spines. It does, but it's relatively small, 200 million, especially if we can get monies for the balance, the 20% from other sources other than our citizens.
Thank you. Mayor Brody.
Simply want to move the motion, the recommendation.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, opposed, carried. And if I can get a motion to refer all other items to our next meeting. Second. With enthusiasm. All those in favor, opposed, carried.
Should we take a 15-minute break?
Move to adjourn, second. All those in favor, opposed, carried.
We have an in-camera meeting.
Yeah, so we're going to the camera.
So we have an in-camera meeting. We'll have a break and reconvene in 10 minutes. We just have to close the doors and clear the room. So we're going to stay here, in-camera meeting. You are not adjourned to leave completely.
Yeah. Well done.
That's right.
We're going to go to congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
I did not know that. Okay.
Almost interesting.
Thank you, boys. Thank you.
You and Al.
Yeah.
We're
We're ready to go. Let's go.
So you know what, you want to be sure that they're after the meeting, or I just want to be sure that people know, like today, there was, so maybe when this is over, that's what you want to vote, you move. So yeah, we're just going to head down here. You know what? Okay, that'd be good, just 5 minutes. We're going to come down.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
That was exciting. You guys like to think it's dramatic.
Yeah.
You know, democracy and all.
I was going to call a weighted vote.
You might have won that one, actually.